All right, good evening, everyone. We'll go ahead and start the meeting. I'll start with call to order. I call the August 10th, 2021 regular Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to order at 7 p.m. We'll start with item 1A, roll call. Commissioner Christensen,
Present.
Commissioner Benavides,
Present.
Commissioner Gay,
Here.
Commissioner Seavey, present. Commissioner Berenson, I have noticed that she's excused from tonight's meeting. Commissioner Michelson.
Present.
Okay, and Commissioner Albert.
She's muted, but she did note that she's here.
Okay. We'll let that stand as a present, Commissioner Albert.
Sorry, I was muted. Present.
That's the phrase of the year, no worries. Let the record reflect that a quorum is present for the meeting. We'll move on to approval of the agenda. Director Justice, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes to the agenda.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
I move that we approve the agenda.
Okay. Do we have a
Second that.
Okay, Commissioner Michelson has moved to approve the agenda. Commissioner Benavides has seconded the motion. We'll now begin with a roll call vote. Commissioner Christensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Benavides,
Yes.
Commissioner Gay,
Yes.
Commissioner Seavey, yes. Commissioner Michelson,
Yes.
and Commissioner Albert.
Yes.
Okay, the motion carries unanimously. We'll move on to public comment period. Residents may address the Planning and Zoning Commission to comment on issues, problems, or successes on topics that do not appear elsewhere on the agenda. Audience members will be given an opportunity to comment on agenda items as they come up. Speakers must register with the village staff prior to the beginning of the meeting. Kiko, do we have anyone lined up to speak?
Yes, stand by.
And I will mention, we are asking the speakers right now to limit their time to 3 minutes apiece, if possible. Good evening. Would you please state your full name and address for the record?
Thank you. Joe Craig, 505 Calle del Pajarito Northwest.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Seavey. I'm appalled at the Planning and Zoning Commission. I have expressed my displeasure to the mayor and to the village administrator. Your previous meeting was in my 30 years of professional service, I have never seen anything so appalling. I've asked the mayor to disband this commission. I've asked the mayor to sanction Commissioner Benavides for his actions. And I think Attorney Winter needs to step down because of her relationship with Commissioner Benavides from any planning and zoning actions, and recuse her firm from any actions with the village of Los Ranchos. Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you, Mr. Craig, for sharing your opinion. Kiko, do we have anyone else lined up to speak?
Stand by. If anybody would like to speak, they can hit their raise their hand button. Stand by. If you raised your hand to speak for the public comment, can you please let us know? If not, you can lower your hand if it's for a later time.
Good evening. If you can hear me, would you please state your full name and address for the record?
Liesl Orand, 208 Larson Street, Manhattan Beach, California, 90266.
Okay, please go ahead, Ms. Warren.
What was Joe Craig's concern that led him to make those actions?
It
So-
was, well, go ahead, Tiffany.
Ms. Orand, so the public comment period isn't really a forum for dialogue. If you have any comments that you would like to make pertaining to anything that's not on the agenda, you're welcome to do so. But at this time, you're welcome to reach out to Mr. Craig on your own, separate from this meeting.
Okay, my comment is that I would like to know what the concerns were that prompted Joe Craig to make those comments and to take those actions.
Thank you, Ms. Oren. Did you have anything else to add?
Nope.
Thank you. Kiko, do we have anyone else lined up?
There is no one else.
Okay. We'll move on to item 3, the consent agenda. All matters listed under the consent agenda are considered to be routine and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items. If discussion is desired, that item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered separately. Item 3A, approval of the minutes of May 11th, 2021. Do we have any corrections or comments from the commissioners? Okay, hearing none. Do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move to approve the minutes as read from the May 11th, 2021 regular meeting.
Do we have a second?
I second. Excuse me, I withdraw.
I only heard you, Commissioner Michelson. Who else seconded? I can put them on the record.
I believe
I
that.
did, Drew.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Gay. Commissioner Christensen has moved to approve the agenda. Commissioner Gay has seconded the motion. We'll move on to a roll call vote. Commissioner Christensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Benavides,
Yes.
Commissioner Gay,
Aye.
Commissioner Seavey, aye. Commissioner Michelson,
Yes,
and Commissioner Albert.
Yes.
Thank you. The motion carries unanimously. We'll now move on to item 4, presentation by Attorney Nan Winter, Village Attorney, a legal overview of the hearing process.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, commissioners. So in light of events of the last several months, we now have an opportunity to sort of look back and take a look at the law that applies to the hearing process that you just went through. I know some of you are new to the process as well, and I know you've attended some of our earlier training, what we'll call training sessions, but now that you've lived through it, you have a real world experience to sort of draw from. And I thought in literally every legal issue that could have popped up in your, relatively short careers on this commission, probably did pop up in the last 90 days. And I thought I would take this opportunity to review with you what that law is, what the procedures are, and to give you some comfort that you followed the village code and your rules for the transaction of business in the last 90 days as it concerns your real world experience. I want to start with the notion, well, let me tell you what I'm going to cover first, and then I'll start with where we are. I'm going to cover the quasi-judicial nature of what you just went through. I'm going to cover ex parte communications and why those are important to avoid. I'm going to address the duty to accept public comment, whether you may defer an action or not, whether you may limit comments to 2 minutes instead of the usual 3, and whether you are permitted under your rules to call a special meeting. Now, if all of that sounds familiar, it's because you've been there in the last 90 days. And Tiffany Justice as well. I mean, she was a very busy woman in the last 90 days. I want to start first with the quasi-judicial nature of what you do. When there's a pending application, you are sitting as a judge. And I'm going to read from you the case law that applies in this. It's a New Mexico case, a 2020 case, and it follows a 2008 New Mexico Supreme Court case. But what that case, this is case law out of the New Mexico Supreme Court. It says that a quasi-judicial proceeding carries with it important procedural consequences, due process protections requiring a fair and impartial hearing before a trier of fact who is disinterested and free from any form of bias or predisposition regarding the outcome of a case. The court goes on to say that interested parties in a quasi-judicial zoning matter are entitled to an opportunity to be heard, to an opportunity to present and rebut evidence, and to a tribunal which is impartial in the matter, having no pre-hearing or ex parte contacts concerning the question at issue. And they are also entitled to a record made and adequate findings. Now, that's essentially the law of the land and how you are obligated to act when you have an application before you. You are acting as a judge, sitting as a judge, and you have this duty to be impartial in the matter. This case law makes reference to interested parties, and there are generally two sides. Generally, we know that we get all kinds of comments, but generally there are two sides of interested parties, or two types of interested parties. One is clearly the applicant and the applicant's surrogates. So if the applicant has an attorney, you can consider that an interested party. If a person speaks in favor of the application, that's probably an applicant surrogate. On the other side, you have the opposition, neighborhood associations, neighbors, people who are concerned about traffic, odors, noises, anyone who speaks in opposition. So those are the interested parties. The case law is pretty clear that interested parties in a quasi-judicial zoning matter, again, are entitled to an opportunity to be heard, to present and rebut evidence, and to present that to an impartial tribunal, having no pre-hearing or ex parte contacts. So with that sort of overview of what you do in terms of its quasi-judicial nature, I want to say that once you all make a decision, generally speaking, it will go to the Board of Trustees. It can be appealed to the Board of Trustees. The moment you do something that is appealed to the Board of Trustees, the Board of Trustees is then acting in a quasi-judicial manner. They then are obligated to operate under these due process constraints dictated by the New Mexico Supreme Court. If the BOT decision is appealed, that goes to the state district court. And that is a civil rule of procedure, Rule 74 and 75. And some of you may recall that we did a Rule 74, 75 appeal from the Board of Trustees on an Airbnb issue application. Oh, this was at least 18 months ago. So it went through your process, went to BOT, it was denied all along the way. And then eventually that applicant filed in the state court an appeal. My job is to represent the village in that appeal. And that record that is presented to the court is everything you say and do. It is public comment, it is briefs, it is argument, it's cross-examination. And unfortunately, if it's ex parte communication that comes to you, that also has to go into the record at the court when it's on appeal. My job as the village attorney is to defend the village on those appeals. I can tell you that I've done a dozen of those, not for this village, but in my career as an attorney. And with the assistance of counsel, we can craft a record that is solid for the court to review. You may recall that at least in the village's appeal that we were defending on the denial of the Airbnb permit, we were successful in defending the village's denial. And it was a good record. And again, my job is to make sure this record is fair, impartial, and the court's not getting any red flags. Okay. So that's sort of how important what you do is. It starts with your quasi-judicial nature. It continues quasi-judicial with the BOT as long as it's still a pending matter. And then ultimately it's going to the state court, who really gives it a once over. So now, having spoken to that issue, I want to chat a little bit about ex parte communications. And your rule, this is a village, I shouldn't say rule, Village Code Ordinance Section 9.2.2.E12 of the Village Code provides that when an item has been placed on the agenda, it becomes a matter under jurisdiction of the commission. That would be you. And subject to legal restraints on ex parte communications. If a commissioner believes they have been contacted ex parte on a pending matter, it is their obligation to inform the other members of the commission prior to the matter's consideration. If the contact was made in writing, the commissioner shall submit it and it will become part of the record. That also has happened, I think, recently in the recent past. Now, what is ex parte communication? I mean, in its most fundamental form, it is literally translates to on or from one side or party only. Ex parte describes any procedure performed by or one party alone, whether or not other parties might be interested in the procedure. I think I think you may be aware that after your May meeting, because there was a deferral of a pending application, the matter was still open. It was still pending. And because it was pending, we had to continue to observe the due process rights that the applicant was entitled to, and we had to continue to observe the due process rights that the opposition was entitled to, which means we had to make sure that there weren't unfair ex parte communications, that somebody wasn't trying to lobby the judge, right? You're still the judge, the BOT's the judge. You can't just call up the judge and speak your mind. That is not the way our judicial system works or our quasi-judicial system works. In keeping with the fact that you deferred a matter in May at your last, I think it is your last full meeting at this point. I can't even recall. On May 12th, Director Justice sent a note to each one of you indicating that it was still a matter pending. And I think in one of her paragraphs in her note to you on May 12th was, talking directly with commissioners is ex parte communications, meaning you are engaging with one party and the other party doesn't have the opportunity to hear or respond. She made a very good point there when she told that to you. Director Justice went on to say that this can compromise the fair and open purpose of the meeting, and there are legal constraints that then become a factor. So she wrote that note to you with a couple other paragraphs. The very next day, Administrator Ann Simon sent a very similar note to the full Board of Trustees. And in her note to the full Board of Trustees, she noted that due to the pending action from Tuesday night's Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, I want to remind trustees to be cautious about talking to the parties involved. This is important because items pending may come back before the board. And she then cautioned that this caution applies to all pending applications, not just something that happened in May. It's applicable to anything that is not finally decided. So in the event there is something noticed but not yet heard, it's pending. In the event there's something that's noticed, heard, and deferred, it's pending. In the event that something is heard by the commission and then appealed to the Board of Trustees, it's pending. And in that pending process, you have this obligation to protect the due process rights of both the applicant and the opposition. So that's, unless you have any questions about either quasi-judicial nature of your proceedings or ex parte communications, I'm going to go on ahead and move on to your duty to accept public comment. Let's see, where are we here? All right. We have gotten both Director Justice, and I think this commission has gotten a little bit of pushback on maybe that you did not temper or moderate what appeared to be highly organized opposition or maybe highly organized support. But that is not your job. Your job is to make sure that everybody gets a fair and impartial hearing. It is the regular practice of the Planning and Zoning Department to assemble public comment and present as much as has been received in the published packet. Director Justice is guided by 9.2.2E9 of the Village Code. It provides in part that applicants must make timely presentation of written materials to the planning and zoning staff. And that generally occurs. Tiffany does an excellent job of noticing your applications early, getting the notice out there, and that prompts her to receive a lot of written public comment that she then loads into the packet. 9.2.2E9 also provides that applicants will not be allowed to provide materials directly to commissioners, nor to supplement or add new documents after the commission's action. Again, this is all fundamental due process and fairness. The code goes on to say that all testimony, information, and documents submitted to the commission prior to its decision and the minutes of the meeting and the transcript of the meeting will constitute the record in the event of appeal. So it is all of that that my office then compiles and sends to district court. That is the record. It is public comment, transcripts, meetings, all that goes to district court. It is Director Justice's regular practice to forward comments to the commission received in the interim. That is to forward comments to you received after publication, but before the commission meeting. That is her usual process. It is not prohibited by the rule. It is something she has done and the Planning and Zoning Department has done, as I understand it, for years. It is particularly a red flag if you deviate from a practice and procedure that you've always implemented. So if all of a sudden Tiffany doesn't do this, an applicant that has an appeal, could raise the fact that, hey, the village has always sent us all, has always published all public comment and has always forwarded all interim public comment, but they didn't do it in this case. That's a red flag for the district court. So in this case, Tiffany was advised and did do what she always did, which is send comment, all comment onto you all, and that then did become a part of the record. Now, most of your cases don't get a lot of public comment. Recently, we had one application that garnered, close to 300 pages of public comment. You're more aware of that than I am. But all public comment, whether it's supportive or opposing, none of it's filtered. Whatever comes in is delivered to you either in the form of a packet or in the interim, or even at meetings like this, where she'll update you on what came in the last couple of days. My observation in the last couple of years that I've been with you is that very little public comment comes in after publication. And that is because Director Justice does an excellent job of noticing your applications extremely timely. So that's sort of what dictates how the record is made, and your duty to accept comment. I want to move next to deferrals, and whether or not this body may defer decision on inaction. And the answer is an unequivocal yes. And to the extent that, there's been an issue about that, I can't tell you enough that you are absolutely entitled, pursuant to the village code, to defer any matter. The village code and the rules for the transaction of business, so two separate documents, both permit a motion to defer. The village code citation on that is section 9.2.2E10. The rules for the transaction of business, which this body updates, I think, every year, is rule Roman 2, capital K. Now, neither the village code nor the rules for the transaction of business provide any guidance as to when the commission may or may not make a motion to defer. And that is common. So we looked at Robert's Rules of Order. We looked at the City of Albuquerque's code. We looked at the Water Authority's code. We looked at the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission's code. Every single one of them allows a deferral of a pending matter by proper motion. Not one of them, including Robert's Rules of Order, says you may only make a motion to defer in these particular instances. There is no limitation. If you were inclined to consider rewriting your rules for the transaction of business to permit deferral only in certain circumstances, you could certainly do that. But the deferral opportunities, you would be limiting your deferral opportunities. But you could limit it such that you're disinviting frivolous deferral opportunities. But I think, as you all have seen, as we've reworked some of your processes and your rules of procedure, like we just went through this process with the whole variance. And I think what you've realized now is that there's really way more factual considerations out there than you're possibly able to limit with words. So if you are inclined to revisit your rules and when you may or may not defer, I would suggest you might want to do what you did with the variance process. That is, maybe perhaps form a subcommittee that discusses this, maybe does some more research, investigates what deferral constraints might be in other jurisdictions. We did not spend a lot of time, but we spent half a day looking at all other local jurisdictions and their deferral opportunities. Given the code and the rules in place, I want to assure you that it was not Director Justice's obligation, and she could not have told you not to defer. She didn't have the authority to tell you you could not defer when your rules specifically allow you to defer. Nor could I have told you that you could not defer. Both your rules and the village code permit deferral. So with that, I will turn next to whether or not you may limit public comment to 2 minutes instead of 3 minutes. It has been your regular practice to limit public comment to 3 minutes. And those rules are those are pretty standard. 3 minutes is pretty standard. We, again, did a survey of local rules, and there's 3 minutes public comment with the Water Authority. There's 3 minutes public comment with the City of Albuquerque. Your rules for the transaction of business at section 2G3 require you, when conducting hearings in the performance of a quasi judicial function, that the commission follow the due process requirements of yet another Supreme Court or Court of Appeals case, State of New Mexico versus Battershell. And again, this case dictates that you are obligated to follow your own rules. The Battershell case, and I did provide a copy to Tiffany if any of you are interested. Here's what Battershell tells you about following your own rules. It is the duty of the zoning board to require a proper public hearing. Such hearing must be basically fair and impartial. The board may not refuse arbitrarily to receive and consider material evidence on the issues being tried. The board is required to apply rules and regulations lawfully adopted by it equally and fairly to all persons properly before it. So if there's any doubt in your mind that somebody should have said, hey, you guys can't defer, no, your rules allow you to defer. The law says you have to follow your rules. And again, if you deviate from the rules or your common practice, it is a red flag for the district court. Now, getting back to the 2 minutes, that was sort of my lead in for the 2 minutes. You did receive some pushback on whether or not public commenters should only be limited to 2 minutes. There is no requirement either in the code or your rules that it be 1 minute, 2 minutes, or 10 minutes, right? The commission, in this case, the most recent case, only you all allowed 2 minutes. And that was because, as you know, 300 pages of public record might indicate, you had dozens and dozens of public commenters. And as it was, I think we were there close to midnight on the night that this hearing went on. Oddly enough, there is a New Mexico Supreme Court case directly on point that says that that case actually upheld limiting speakers' comments to 2 minutes when they were also given the opportunity to provide written comment. And that is something that Director Justice is, again, very good at, soliciting public comment and then putting it in the packet. And then you're also, you also have this opportunity to present public comment on the record. So 2 minutes, oddly enough, in New Mexico is okay. Again, if you want to consider adding something like that to your rules, I think you lose some flexibility in your rules if you do that, but you might want to consider this whole subcommittee process again. Last, and I think the easiest one is, and you may or may not know this, but Tiffany, Director Justice, and I were fielding criticism from both sides, right? I mean, you heard what you heard, but behind the scenes there was, letter writing campaigns and voicemail campaigns and criticism. One particular criticism that you may not have heard about was that, do you have the authority to call a special meeting? And do you have to call a special meeting while you're in a meeting? And some people were operating under the belief that you can only call a special meeting if you're in an open meeting. And that's just not the case either. Both the code and your rules for the transaction of business, and I'll give you those citations. The rules for the transaction of business, Rule 2B, and the code, Section 9.2.2.E4, say nearly the same thing. Special meetings may be called by the chair or by a majority of the commissioners for a time and date certain at a location fully accessible to the public in the village of Los Ranchos. So in this particular case, I think Director Justice sent all of you an email saying, hey, do you want to have a special meeting? She did that in accordance with 9.2.2.E4. At then some point, it became obvious that somebody wanted to cancel the special meeting. And she sent you a nearly identical note saying, hey, do you want to cancel the special meeting? When it was decided there would be a special meeting, she immediately engaged and published notice of the special meeting, began collecting and soliciting public comment once again, and developing a record for the special meeting. Ultimately, you decided to cancel the special meeting, but I wanted to make it crystal clear to you all that it is within your authority and power to call a special meeting exactly as you called it in this instance. So with that, I think I don't have anything else to add. If you have questions, I will do my best to answer them. But I just wanted to give you some comfort that your deferral process, your receipt of public comment, your limitation to 2 minutes, your calling of the special meeting was done exactly as contemplated by your rules. If you don't like your rules, or if you want to manipulate them for any reason, again, I'm just suggest maybe you defer to that sort of the variance process where you invoked a subcommittee. So I stand for questions.
Thank you, Attorney Winter. Do we have any questions from the commission for our attorney? Okay, well, thank you for taking the time to make that presentation. It's much appreciated. We will move on to item 5, public hearings and applications. We'll begin with item 4A, conditional use 21-02, a request for townhouses with a minimum of 24 dwelling units per gross acre as allowed by 9.2.14C in the VC zone in the 4th Street character area. The property is located at 6502 4th Street Northwest and is legally known as Lot A, Blanche P. Dokins subdivision of Lot 2, Merritt Acres, excluding the easterly 165.84 feet, School District 4, Bernalillo County, New Mexico, as filed in the office of the Bernalillo County Clerk on September 30th, 1937. The property contains 0.5016 acres, more or less, and a note, this item added due to, this item has been added due to adverse comment received during the administrative approval public notice period. And do we have any commissioners who will recuse themselves from this item? Okay, seeing none. Attorney Winter, would you please swear in Director Tiffany Justice?
Tiffany, please raise your right hand. I don't actually see her.
I have my hand raised.
Okay. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Director Justice, may we have the planning report?
Yes. So commissioners, I just want to elaborate a bit on the note that Chair Seavey read out. Typically, when a item is added to our agenda due to adverse public comment, I usually add it to the end of the agenda because I go in chronological order of when these things are submitted. However, the decision for this item is necessary for the next one for a variance. So this needs to be acted on before the variance. So with that, this application is for conditional use for townhomes in property that is zoned village center. The minimum number of townhouses that is allowed in the village center zone is 24 per gross acre. Because this property is half an acre, that is 12 townhomes. So this conditional use is for the minimum number of townhomes that's required. Any less would require a variance, hence the next item. So the approval, if approved, would be for the condition as currently written for 24 townhomes per gross acre. So the analysis for conditional use applications that are forwarded to the commission due to adverse public comment is that when there's adverse comment, the commission shall approve a conditional use if section 9.2.25 E to A through D are met. So I'll be going through A through D. A is that the conditional use is compliant with the master plan and not injurious to the surrounding neighborhood or community. And so this conditional use would not be injurious to adjacent property in the neighborhood or the community, since this does need to meet buffering requirements between commercially and residentially zoned properties. The use as residential will complement the single family residential to the east. And this property is technically allowed to have commercial as well. So the use for residential is actually a lower, I guess, quote unquote, lower kind of use compared to the commercial activity that could be occurring on this property. The design of the townhomes will have to meet the village's development requirements through the site development plan process that will be determined later. And higher density residential housing is supported by both the 2035 master plan and the purpose and intent of the village center zone. In the 2035 master plan, it is compliant with the section on residential development. For item B, this is the opportunity for commission to add more conditions to a conditional use application. And so since this property is zoned village center, which is mixed use and commercial and higher density residential, development is already required to go through the site development plan process, which will ensure that the proposed townhomes will meet our development standards. And so the only conditions that I'm proposing in my recommendation is just for the number of dwelling units per village center code. C is that no application for conditional use has been applied for this property in the prior 6 months. That is the case for this. And then D is that the public notice requirements have been met, and the public notice requirements have been met. So with that, the department recommends approval of CU 21-02, a request for townhouses with a minimum of 24 dwelling units per gross acre as allowed by section 9.2.14C in the village center zone in the forestry character area with the following conditions and findings. The condition is that the minimum number of dwelling units is 24 per gross acre. And again, I note that the exact number of dwelling units will be approved during the site development plan process. Right now, it's a minimum of 24. However, that is not the number that is required. It could be upwards 25 or 26. With the findings that section 9.2.25 E2 A through D are met, and I stand for any questions.
Okay, thank you, Director Justice. Do we have any questions from the commission for the planning director? Go ahead, Commissioner Benavides.
Yes, Director Justice. So in regards to the 24 units per acre as a minimum, I may not know the history of where that came from, and perhaps there's a good rationale behind that, but why 24?
Commissioner Benavides, commissioners, I was not there when this was written, so keep in mind that what I'm saying is my interpretation and speculation on this. But I do believe that the reason for 24 is that our other sections, our other zones that are commercial or mixed use have other dwelling unit densities, requirements of either maximums or minimums. And our next highest residential density is in the commercial zone, which has a maximum of 20 units, 20 dwelling units per acre, I believe. And the idea with the purpose and intent of the village center zone, just quoting from the purpose and intent, is to support the desired commercial development, the village center zone should be the highest density residential zoning district in the village of Los Ranchos. So the idea was, I believe, to do more than 20 and require 24 in this case. And I may need to correct myself on that citation of 20.
So are you suggesting that if higher density dwelling units would mean there's more people in the vicinity to to be customers of the businesses on 4th Street? Is that the rationale that we need more
Commissioner
people?
Benavides, commissioners, yes, I do believe that is the rationale. The idea with the entire purpose and intent of the village center zone is to have higher density commercial activities, mixed use activities, residential activities. The idea is to have a pedestrian accessible, transit accessible development. And the idea with higher density commercial activities is that in order to support that, there would have to be higher density residential. And so in this case, the purpose and intent of the village center zone so that this would be the highest density residential.
Okay.
Do we have any other, oh, excuse me.
No, that was it. I'm trying to, just comprehend why that's helpful, and I can kind of understand why it's helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Do we have any other questions from the commission for Director Justice? Okay, is the applicant present?
Stand by.
Good evening. If you can hear us, would you please state your name and address for the record?
Sure. My name's Chris Pacheco. The address is 5905 El Prado Northwest, Los Ranchos, New Mexico, 87107.
Thank you. Attorney Winter, would you please swear in Mr. Pacheco?
Mr. Pacheco, can you please raise your right hand? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Would
you like to speak about your application?
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to about our application. Real quick, what we're asking for, and I know there's a separate agenda item for this. We'd like to build some townhomes on that property. We feel it goes very well with the master plan. We also feel it goes very well with the village center development plan. We'll talk about the variance requested. Currently, the density is 24 units per acre, as Director Justice said. Half acres, 12 units, obviously. We did receive 2 adverse comments. I'd like to address those. The first was that they felt the development would negatively impact the view corridor. So we went back and looked, and to our east, we have a church. To our west, we have 4th Street. To our south, we have commercial tenants. And to our north, we have commercial tenants. So given that we're going to build 2-story units in conformance with village code, I think that the impact of the view corridor for the residents is negligible. The second adverse comment dealt with the ability to see traffic when entering 4th Street from Willow. And if you look at page 25 of your packet, that's our proposed site development plan. Subject to change, obviously, but the dwellings themselves are 40 feet back from 4th Street. The only obstruction is a pre-existing bus stop, which belongs to the city of Albuquerque, and I'm pretty sure that's going to stay. But there are no obstructions to traffic when entering 4th Street from Willow. The reason we'd like to do this is, well, first of all, we're native New Mexicans. We moved to the village in 1996. We're very supportive of the village's efforts. The one thing we have noticed is the aging population of the village, and this gives us the opportunity to build some housing units that are at a price point where younger families can afford, or older people like my wife and I that are tired of taking care of acreage and can move or downsize into a smaller house. So we feel this is a strong addition to the housing requirements in the village currently.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Pacheco. Do we have any questions from the commission for the applicant? Commissioner Gay, go ahead, please. Looks like you might be muted.
Sorry. Chris, can I be clear that these are townhomes which are for sale? They're not apartments which are going to be rented?
Correct. correct. Our intent is not to own the property forever. Our intent is to build townhomes and sell.
Okay, like forever as, but they are townhomes. They're not townhomes for rent, they're townhomes for sale.
Yes, sir. This is a development that'll be for sale. Yeah, we anticipate at the end, the development have its own HOA.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any other questions for the applicant from the commission? Okay, seeing none. Do we have anyone present who would like to speak in favor of the application?
There are no hands raised.
Thank you, Kiko. Do we have anyone present who would like to speak in opposition to the application?
Stand by. Ms. Camille, are you there?
I am.
Okay,
It's,
good
it's
evening.
hard because good evening.
Would you please state your full name and address for the record?
Yes, Camille Vados, 427 El Paraíso Road, Los Ranchos.
Thank you. Oh, and Attorney Winter, would you please swear in Ms. Varos?
Ms. Vados, would you please raise your right hand?
Yes,
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
yes, I do.
Thank you.
Please go ahead, Ms. Varos.
Okay, I'm not new to the planning and zoning or P and Z meetings or the trustees, because I've lived here for near 72 years. Change is inevitable, but when we talk about what is good for the village, okay, I'm aging. I don't know how much longer I could uphold my half acre of property. But it's still viable to me, and land is a passion of mine, and so is the village. But when you talk about Willow having, I know the applicant said there is no foreseeable impact of traffic. What we have seen down El Paraíso and Mullen, I'm directly across west of this proposed development, and what's going on because of the increased traffic on 4th, and people don't necessarily want to go to Osuna to go to Rio Grande Boulevard. They come right down our street, and I could foresee that happening because it's straight across. They're going to go, and it's very obvious to us. Our neighborhood is aging, but on the other hand, new people coming into our neighborhood that are buying the homes as people move on, or children sell the original family homes. We have 12 new children in our home, in our association, or in our neighborhoods. And it's frightening to know the amount of traffic that comes down our street. Our kids are wanting to ride bikes, or I, as a senior person, want to walk down my street in the mornings and in the evenings. And the traffic now is impacted. So I could just imagine, as the village moves forward with, the master plan. And just because an application meets the criteria doesn't necessarily mean it is right for our village. In neighborhoods that are established and residents, and I've been one for a long time, and I pay taxes, my voice should be heard. Neighborhood resident people's voices should be heard, because our villages, I can't even keep up with the applications that are going up, not just for short-term rentals or business permitting in neighborhoods adjacent to mine. I almost have to, this is a full-time job to do. And I have to trust that the commissioners, along with the trustees or administration, really looks at where our village has been. We're deemed agricultural. Do we want to move towards commercial and high-rise apartment living, which might be considered, oh, this is what millennials or senior people want? Not necessarily. You know, I would hope that we could turn to the commissioners who seem to think that, okay, this meets the ordinance, so therefore we could approve it. Well, I think you need to stop and see where, you know, you can, how many of residential people are on this Zoom to voice? We could send in written comments, but how do we know where it stands? Because an application follows the ordinance, you know, and that's my concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Varos. Kiko, do we have anyone else lined up to speak in opposition to the application?
Stand by.
Mute.
Good evening. Would you please state your full name and address for the record?
Yes, my name is Jason Aragon, 526 Mullen Road, Northwest, 87107.
Thank you. Attorney Winter, would you please swear in Mr. Aragon before he proceeds?
Mr. Aragon, would you please raise your right hand? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Please go ahead, Mr. Aragon.
So I kind of want to follow up on Camille's mention of traffic. I agree with her as far as the traffic here on Mullen. It does get heavy. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we have no speed bumps. I know Paraiso has 5, but Mullen has none. I'm not going to say that the condos going up are going to be a bad thing for the village, but I do agree with the traffic and how much it's going to attract more traffic in this area. I've got 4 kids. When she mentioned new people coming in, we're one of the new ones. This is my wife's grandmother's and grandfather's house. We were able to purchase it. So we are that new generation here with 4 kids. And our kids do like to ride their bikes in the park, in the road. And, you know, just that's that old school, you know, neighborhood love that you can have. But when cars are flying down the road with no care in the world, and there's nothing really to deter them, i.e. speed bumps, that does kind of concern me, especially adding additional housing units to it. Like I said, I'm not opposed to it, but I'd like to see more safety to the fact that there's still these other old school neighborhoods like ours that have children as well, that I would think that the commission should think in regards to our safety and our children's safety when it comes down to going further with this paperwork and possibly building this or allowing this homes to be built. I like the idea that they're for sale and not for rent. That's a good, that to me is a good thing. I agree with that 100%. But at the same time, again, it's all safety. I mean, since I've been here, we've been here a couple of years now. I can say there's at least, with our 4, I would say combined 10 kids, roughly, just within the proximity. You know, you see them walking, you see them with their families, you know, they're riding their bikes, that kind of stuff. And that's where I get this speed bumps may not solve everything, but it does slow down traffic a lot. Because I guarantee you, more people come down Mullen on my side than they do out Paraiso, because we don't have any speed bumps. So they're gonna fly down, go around, go to El Paraiso, and then cut across wherever they're gonna go, to Rio Grande, to the winery, Guadalupe Trail, wherever they choose to go. But that's another thing, and I've witnessed it firsthand where they come flying down the road. So I think that should be taken into consideration when this does come to play. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aragon. Kiko, do we have anyone else lined up to speak in opposition to the application?
I have no other hands raised.
Okay, thank you. Now, would the applicant like to respond to any of these comments?
Yeah, well, I definitely understand and can relate to the gentleman's comments about speed bumps. Like I said, we moved here in '96. We raised our family here. And yeah, I mean, we had little kids. We had 3 children that would run up and down the street, ride their bikes, and do everything just like an old school neighborhood. And sir, I can tell you that was a concern of mine the entire time we raised our kids. I don't know how much traffic 12, we've actually, that's the next agenda item. We've asked for variance to reduce that amount. But 4th Street is a commercial corridor. It's a commercial road. And I have no way of being able to say that the residents would go down those streets to get to Rio Grande, because I mean, we live on the other side of the fire station. I use Osuna to get to Rio Grande, but I can definitely empathize with the speed bump comment. I mean, our kids are all grown and gone now, but I can remember telling my wife that as the kids grew up, man, I wish we had some speed bumps.
All right, well, do we have at this point any further comments from the commission? Hearing none. Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Benavides.
So in regards to the issue of speed bumps, it's almost a separate issue, an independent issue. And I'm wanting to tell the 2 people that spoke for public comment. I'd like to tell them, hey, this is what you do to make an appeal for speed bumps. And so maybe Tiffany can tell them what the process is if they're requesting speed bumps.
Commissioner Benavides, commissioners, yes. So we have a public facilities manager, Keen Heinzelman, who manages our public facilities, including roads. And if they would like to petition for speed bumps, I recommend that they get in touch with him. His contact information is available on our website under our staff page. So if you go to losranchosnm.gov, under the government dropdown, there should be a staff, which has his phone and email address.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Do we have any further comments from the commission before I close the floor? Hearing none, I will now close the floor for comments. And do we have any discussion on the application prior to the motion? Go ahead, Commissioner Benavides.
So yeah, this half-acre lot has been vacant for a long time. I've lived here since 1984, and I do remember there was a gas station there. And it's commercial property, and it's just been sitting there with nothing on it. So those that oppose should consider the possibility that something should be allowed to happen there. And it could be a commercial thing. So if you're worried about the traffic, what could happen next could be worse. So I'm glad somebody wants to do something with a piece of property, to tell you the truth. That's it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Do we have any other discussion? Hearing none. Yeah, seeing that this property is in village center zoned and that the applicant is attempting at least to meet the higher density in this area. It does mesh nicely with the master plan as Tiffany laid out in the department report. And for those reasons, I'd feel inclined to move forward and approve the conditional use. I know there's a lot more to discuss after we get past this point. So anyway, if we don't have any further discussion, is there a motion? Go ahead, Commissioner Benavides.
Mute. Okay.
You're
No,
on mute, sorry.
So, yeah, I would like to make a motion to approve of this conditional use, and I'm sorry I lost the pages. I don't know the number if I need to do that. But I motion to approve.
I second it.
Commissioners, could I just, for the sake of the record, could I get a motion to approve with the condition?
And
Thank you.
yes, and as soon as I said that, I realized I should have said with the conditions as stated in your report. Is that what you're talking about, Tiffany? Okay, yes.
Commissioner Gay, do you second the amended motion?
I second it.
Okay, Commissioner Benavides has moved to approve conditional use 21-02 with the included condition in the department report. And Commissioner Gay has seconded the motion. We'll now move on to a roll call vote. Commissioner Christensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Benavides,
Yes.
Commissioner Gay,
Yes.
Commissioner Seavey, yes, Commissioner Michelson,
Yes.
and Commissioner Albert.
Yes.
All right, the motion carries unanimously. Let the record show that the public hearing item 4A, the request for townhouses with a minimum of 24 dwelling units per gross acre, is formally closed. We'll now move on to item 4B, variance 21-05, a request by Nemagen Plaza Limited Liability Corporation for a variance from 9.2.14C. Townhouses are required to provide a minimum of 24 dwelling units per gross acre to allow for 16 dwelling units per gross acre in the VC zone in the 4th Street character area. The property is located at 6502 4th Street Northwest and is legally known as Lot A Blanche P. Doken subdivision of Lot 2 Merritt Acres, excluding the easterly 165.84 feet. School District 4, Bernalillo County, New Mexico, as filed in the office of the Bernalillo County Clerk on September 30th, 1937. The property contains 0.5016 acres more or less. Do we have any commissioners who will recuse themselves from this item? I'm hoping not, because it's the same case. And Director Justice has been sworn in, so may we please have the planning report?
Yes, commissioners, this application is related to the conditional use that was just approved for townhomes on a property. This variance is for fewer townhomes than the condition that is required by the Village Center Code. So with 24 units per gross acre, if this property being a half acre would be 12 units. The applicant desires to build 8 units on this property. So this variance is for a reduction of 1/3 of the units that's required. And whether the variance is approved or not, the proposed development will be required to go through the site development plan process prior to approval of the building permits. So for variances, there's a few criteria that we look to provide some guidance as to whether or not this should be approved. There's 3 sections, A, B, and C, in which there's multiple things that I'll just discuss. So the first is under A, 9.2.25 E7A1. The variance is and is not in conformance with the goals and policies of the village master plan. This is because by nature of the request, all variances do not conform with the master plan because we have language in our master plan to enforce our zoning requirements. This variance is supported by the master plan in sections that support relatively low density residential, and it is contrary in sections that support higher density residential. And so regarding section 9.2.25 E7A2, this variance is contrary to the public interest. The applicant cites that reduced density will decrease traffic, reduce lighting requirements, reduce parking requirements, reduce the lot's carbon footprint, and will produce a more aesthetically pleasing development. The department does not believe this is the case, as mentioned throughout the report. The section of 4th Street between Osuna and Chavez and Grecian Avenue has an average weekday traffic count of 16,400 vehicles based on 2019 traffic flows from the Mid-Region Council of Governments. The additional vehicles from 8 townhomes versus 12 townhomes is negligible. For lighting, regardless of the number of units on the property, the development would be required to comply with the village's dark skies ordinance. The parking requirements will be reduced. However, the minimum parking space requirement for VC zone property for residential units is 1 space per residence, with 1 to 2 car garages as shown in the proposed elevations. Even with corresponding driveways, each unit in this conceptual design has at least twice the required amount of parking already. There would also not necessarily be a reduction in the carbon footprint with fewer units. While there'd be fewer people in the units, therefore reduction in vehicles per household and utilities, studies show that higher density can provide an overall reduction in emissions for multiple reasons, such as smaller building footprint, leading to less heating and cooling, shared walls aiding in insulation. Usually this is coupled with better walkability and transit options that are available in denser areas. Additionally, providing more units provides more housing, and the aesthetics of the buildings must at a minimum meet the village's design regulations. Landscaping requirements must also be met. The variance is also contrary to the purpose and intent of the village center zone, as I discussed earlier for Commissioner Benavides. To support the desired commercial development, the village center zone should have the highest density residential zoning district in the village of Los Ranchos. And this does compare to the Gateway District zone and the commercial zone, both of which have lower dwelling unit densities per acre. So the village center zone does have the highest residential density requirement out of all the village's commercial or residential zones. A comparable reduction, if allowed with a variance, would be to 20 dwelling units per acre. This would be similar to the C1 zone, or 10 dwelling units per half acre. But this would not be the highest residential density. The village received comments in opposition to publishing of the meeting packet as well. And then regarding section 9.2.25 E7A3, the variance needs to meet a hardship criteria, and in this case, it does not. The applicant cites hardship criteria number 2. However, that is not applicable as the request for 8 townhomes is not tied with the condition or use of the land. The size of the land is not unusual, as there's other properties in the village center zone with comparable acreage. Across the street, there are similarly sized half-acre properties. The village center project to the north is not the only property that is zoned village center. And so just in general, there's some various requirements for section 9.2.257C. The application does meet under that subsection 1, 2, and 5. That this doesn't affect the zoning, the financial gain or loss is not a deciding factor, and that no prior application for a variance has been submitted on this property in the prior 6 months. However, the application also is not in conformance with subsections 3, 4, and 6 of that, requiring the hardship criteria, the hardship not being self-imposed, and that this application could set precedents for various applications in residential dwelling unit density without justification of a hardship criteria. And so with that, the department recommends denial of B21-05 for a variance from section 9.2.14C. Townhouses are required to provide a minimum of 24 dwelling units per gross acre to allow for 16 dwelling units per gross acre in the village center zone in the 4th Street character area. With the findings that the variance request does meet some of the variance requirements, but not some of the others, the ones that I just discussed, and that public notice requirements have been met. If the commission does decide to approve this variance, the department recommends the following condition, that the variance is for 10 dwelling units per half acre, comparable to the maximum dwelling unit density allowed in the commercial zone. So just for context, I know I'm throwing around a lot of numbers with this being a half acre versus a whole acre. The conditional use application is for 24 dwelling units per acre, which is 12 units on this half-acre property. The variance is for 8 dwelling units. And so the legal language for this is 16 per acre. Just for context, this would just be for 8 townhomes instead of 12. But I know I threw around a lot of numbers, and I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Director Justice. Do we have any questions from the commission for the planning director?
Yeah, Drew, I have questions.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Tiffany, I'm having a hard time following the dots on why this is the amount of units is less units than the maximum or the minimum. How do you substantiate recommending denial of it based on that? I can't quite connect all the dots that you are, so maybe you could help me out here.
Commissioner Gay, commissioners, yes, so I am recommending denial because the minimum amount of townhomes that is required for this property would be 12. And there is not necessarily justification in the variance language in our code to allow for lower than our minimum. And with that, I cited just a few sections about master plan and conformance with the village center zone. The primary factor when looking at this is that the applicant does not meet one of our hardship criteria. So approval of this variance without meeting a hardship criteria could set precedence for having lower density residential than is typically required without requiring a hardship criteria. So the primary factor for me is that it does not meet a hardship criteria, even though it may be desirable for the community at large to have fewer units and maybe more aesthetically pleasing, that kind of thing.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So if Mr. Pacheco decided to submit for 12 units, then there would not be this. He could do that and not need a variance. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. If he was proposing a development that had 12 units, we wouldn't be sitting here with this variance application, or any more than 12 units.
8 versus 12, and the trade-off is that we don't have, he didn't meet the hardship criteria because of that. And yeah, I guess that's my only question. Thank you.
Please go ahead, Commissioner Christensen.
Tiffany, and I just need clarification. This isn't a mixed zone. There is commercial and there is residential. Is that correct?
Commissioner Christensen, commissioners, this zone allows for both commercial uses, residential uses, and mixed uses on the property. If they wanted to, they could do solely commercial, solely residential, or both commercial and residential on the property.
And so when you come up with your condition, you have a condition at the end of your report and you came up with 10. You said the variance is for the conditions, a variance for 10 dwellings. That was based on if it's a C1. Am I following?
Yes, so Commissioner Christensen, commissioners, I recommend denial of this application. However, in the case that the commission would want to approve this application, I am recommending that if it is approved, that there is a condition for the minimum number of units to be comparable to the maximum that's allowed in the commercial zone, which is 10 dwelling units on this property, or 20 dwelling units overall, so that it wouldn't necessarily be the highest density residential, since it would be equivalent to the C1 zone. However, it would be comparable in that it's high density residential.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the commission? Go ahead, Commissioner Benavides.
So the requirement of 24 dwellings per unit per acre, I mean 24 dwelling units per acre, That is not explicitly stated in the master plan. Is that correct or not correct?
That is correct. It is not explicitly stated in the master plan. The 24 dwelling units is something that's explicitly stated in the village center section of our code.
Okay, so it sounds like you would be okay with 10 per half acre. You feel like if I'm putting words in your mouth, let me know that's a reasonable thing to do, but 8 is just a bridge too far. So how is it, on one hand, we're able to ignore the hardship criteria for 10, but not able to ignore it for 8?
Commissioner Benavides, commissioners, I'd like to just be clear that I am recommending denial, point blank. I'm not saying that I recommend approval if in any circumstance. I am recommending denial. However, in prior cases where the department has recommended denial and the commission has approved an application, if there aren't conditions like stated in that approval, then sometimes that can get lost in the approval. So, in cases where an application was approved and it would have been nice to have a condition on some aspect of it. So like say for a setback, and we wanted it just for that building instead of just for the entire property. Now that condition is not on that variance. So for applications where I am recommending denial, where I see fit for there to be a condition, if it is approved, I will include the language for that condition. So I'm not recommending 10 dwelling units. I'm recommending denial. However, if the commission chooses to approve this application, I am recommending that it have a condition of approval. I'm sorry, is that any clearer?
Well, I mean, it doesn't get to the point about, the requirements for a hardship reason for a variance, right? So either there's a hardship or there isn't. And as a commissioner, are we free to just say, hey, we don't care about the hardship, we're going to give a variance anyway? Is that within our scope?
I would defer to Attorney Winter on that for the legal response. However, I would recommend that there be a hardship criteria in order to approve a variance. However, because if there is an approval where there is no hardship criteria that's met, it can set precedent for the fact that you don't need a hardship criteria to approve a variance.
So, okay, but if we were to do some sort of compromise solution whereby we would allow 10, aren't we still throwing the hardship criteria out the window?
Yes, and that's why I do recommend denial.
Yes.
I'm just having that 10 as a relatively comparable density if the commission would choose to proceed with approving the variance.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions from the commission? If not, is the applicant present?
Stand by.
While Mr. Pacheco's coming back on, I'll ask Tiffany or Nan, do we need to swear in Mr. Pacheco again, or can we move on?
No need to swear him in again. He's sworn.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Pacheco, would you like to speak about your application?
Yeah, I mean, it is hard for us to claim a hardship other than, trying to fit 12 units on a half acre is going to give me more gray hair if that's possible. But it's hard to claim a hardship. So, we can do 10, we can do 12. I mean, we'll go with whatever the commission recommends. As a developer, I find myself in an ironic position asking for less than I'm allowed to have. But we do feel that 8 units would be more aesthetically pleasing, probably easier to manage, definitely easier to site plan for. because there are, there's the landscaping requirements, there's setback requirements, there's garbage. There's a lot of zoning requirements that we have to meet. And to fit 12 units on there is going to make that a very tight, small piece of property. With that being said, we'll go with the commission's decision. 10 units is workable also. And then the last thing, Commissioner Benavides, I like your comment that the bridge too far. I don't know if you watched the movie, but Nijmegen was a bridge too far from the movie. I'm an old paratrooper, so all our developments are named after old paratrooper drop zones. Nijmegen, Eindhoven, Salerno, Sicily. Those are the names of our developments. So I don't know if that was intended, but I really appreciated that. Nijmegen was literally a bridge too far. I have no further comments, Commissioner Seavey. I'd prefer to do 8. I think 8 is more manageable. It's easier to site plan. But for me to claim hardship, I think I couldn't. It'd be difficult.
Thank you, Mr. Pacheco. Do we have anyone present? Oh, I'm sorry. Do we have any questions from the commission for Mr. Pacheco before we move on? Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Benavides.
What is the square footage of each unit if you were to have 8 units? And what would the square footage be if you were to have 12?
So if we have 8 units, I think right now we're planned at about 1,600 feet per unit because they're 2-story units. That would reduce by about a third. So a third of 1,600. So they'd be about between 1,000 and 1,200 feet. The units would be pretty small at that point.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Pacheco before we move on? Okay, do we have anyone present who would like to speak in favor of the application?
There are no hands raised.
All right, thank you, Kiko. Do we have anyone present who would like to speak in opposition to the application?
Stand by.
All right, if you can hear us, please state your full name and address for the record.
Camille Barros, 427 El Paraíso Road, Los Ranchos.
Now, we've heard you before, Ms. Varos. I'm wondering if we need to swear you in again. I'm thinking not, but I will defer to Attorney Winter on that.
Mr. Chair, she has already been sworn.
Okay, excellent. Please go ahead, Ms. Varos.
Well, I've previously stated my opposition of the development, but I don't know where this lies. But listening to our director, Tiffany Justice, I appreciate her rationale for denying based on, based on the criteria that's already established in, I guess, the ordinance. And that's my comment. And I would hope that her expertise and her judgment would be honored by the commissioners. And that's my statement. And thank you, Director Justice, for your expertise in denying the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Varos. Kiko, do we have anyone else lined up to speak in opposition to the application?
There are no other hands raised.
Okay, thank you. And now would the applicant like to respond to any of these comments?
I don't think I mean, like I said, if Planning and Zoning Commission goes ahead and denies the variance, we'll figure out a way to make it work. I feel that a half acre is kind of small to put 12 units on. Director Justice is right. It's hard for me to claim hardship. I've just done enough development to know that 12 is a lot to put on a half acre. And that's my only comment. Thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you. Do we have any further comments from the commission before I close the floor for comments? All right, hearing and seeing none. I'm going to go ahead and close the floor now for comments. And do we have any discussion prior to a motion?
Yeah, Chair Seavey, I have a question for Director Justice. In the VC zone, what's the maximum allowable building height?
Commissioner Gay, commissioners, the maximum building height is the lesser of 3 stories or 48 feet.
So it's conceivable that he might, Mr. Pacheco just might decide he could build 3 stories instead of 2 stories and achieve whatever he needed to.
That is an option. However, I will say that if he does intend to sell the units, as he mentioned, that may be difficult to do if there are units that are, solely restricted to the 3rd floor or solely restricted to the 2nd floor, or just not tied to the land and the land division. So it is possible, but that is something that would be determined in the site development plan process.
Okay, so then let me just clarify your last comment about if we don't have a hardship, if he does not met the hardship criteria, did I hear you imply that we might be setting up a precedent that has implications down the road? Is that what you said?
Commissioner Gay, commissioners, yes, that is what I'm implying and stating at this point, is that so variances do have to meet our criteria that we recently redid back in May, possibly. In the last couple of months, we did change our variance criteria. We do have hardship criteria, and our code does say that you do need a hardship in order to really provide the basis for a variance.
And Mr. Chair, Commissioner, this is Nan. The variance provision is pretty clear. It may be granted if 3 conditions exist. The variance is in conformance with the goals and policies of the village, and it is not contrary to the public interest in protecting and fostering character of the vicinity in the village, and will not cause material adverse impacts on the property or the neighborhood. And owing to special conditions, a literal enforcement of this chapter 9 will result in unnecessary hardship. So you have to have all 3 conditions.
Then
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
What are Mr. Pacheco's options at this point if this motion or this application is denied? When can he refile, redraw his plans, or reconfigure this entire project? Would it be better? Would it be less? It's not either better or less, but if this goes forward and is denied, does he have to wait out 6 months or 12 months time period before he can file a revised application?
Commissioner Gay, commissioners, yes. Our requirements are that a variance application cannot be applied for until after 6 months from the date of final action. So it'd be 6 months from tonight as when he could reapply for a variance for anything for the property, not necessarily for the dwelling units. That holds whether or not it's approved or denied.
Okay, so is there anything the applicant can do tonight? Can he pull his application now and not have to go through that process? Or is it already too late for him?
I will defer to Attorney Winter on that. I usually, if an application is withdrawn, there's no official action taken. However, given the fact that we're in the middle of a public hearing, that complicates things a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
And so Director Justice, I mean, what I'm hearing is that he cannot reapply for a variance for another 6 months, but he can submit for a site development plan at his leisure. He's not really tied to this if we were to deny this variance request. Is that what I'm hearing?
Chair CV, Commissioners, that's correct. The site development plan process is separate from this variance entirely. The results of this variance do not hinder the progress in the site development plan.
Thank you, Director Justice. That clears it up for me. So if he, hypothetically, if this was denied and he needed to apply for another variance, that's when we'd have a time limit or a period of waiting that would be required.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Michelson, please.
Yes, I think this is one of the first applications for construction in the VC zone. Is that a correct statement, Tiffany?
Commissioner Michelson, in recent history perhaps, but there's quite a few properties in the VC zone that already are developed, and some of which do have site development plans. There just hasn't been as much activity perhaps just in recent years.
And all of those were approved for 12 units per half acre?
Commissioner Michelson, Commissioners, I believe that this is the first application that is for townhomes in the Village Center zone.
That's what I meant. Okay,
Yes.
that's the first thing. This is the first application. The second one, this is on 4th Street. And I think setbacks in that are going to be extremely important if you're living there. I am leaning towards your recommendation that if denial is not what we want to do, that we approve 10 units instead of the 8 that they requested.
Thank you, Commissioner. Do we have any other discussion before a motion?
Yeah, Chair CVA, so JT, it doesn't matter whether we approve 8 or 10, it's still, there's no hardship criteria met. So I'm not following your logic of approving 10 as being, I mean, I know the applicant said he would build 10. I'm just trying to find it seems to me that he also could very well go out and design a 3-story, 12-unit complex. And we'd never talk about it. I think it's an administrative approval is what I'm following. So what is in the best interest of the village based on that? That was not a fair question. I'm not directing that at you, JT. I'm just saying 8 or 10 didn't seem to matter much if it still wouldn't have a hardship criteria met. So the next level would be 12. And if he wants to build 12, he could go 3 stories because he has a higher height requirement. So, I think it's probably not a good scenario for anybody. He doesn't want to build that many. The residents are having a hard time with 8 units. So I can't imagine what it would be like to have 12 units or a 3-story unit. So it's kind of a lose-lose. It's too bad we're at this point and talking about this, but so that's all I got.
Commissioner Benavides, I think I saw a hand raise.
Yeah. So let me start with what could be a silly question. So the hardship criteria is always, I'm looking for a yes or no for Tiffany, is always directed at the applicant, meaning it's a hardship for the applicant. Do we ever consider a hardship for the residents that live near the property?
Mr. Benavides, commissioners, the answer is kind of yes. I know that's not exactly a straight answer, but we have 5 different hardship criteria, which are tied to the land primarily, not all of it, but primarily tied to the land. And it does reference it being exceptional in relation to the vicinity. So the hardship criteria has to be met by the applicant, by the property, but it does have some consideration for the neighbors, but there is not one that is explicitly in the interest of the neighboring properties.
So, I would imagine if he had to put more units on that half acre, the setbacks, he would probably drive it to the absolute minimum, and perhaps people that live on Willow that are trying to get onto 4th Street, their view is obstructed because there's inadequate setbacks, inadequate for them. So is that a hardship if that was to be the case?
Commissioner Benavides, no. So for properties that are zoned commercial or village center, there is a 15-foot residential buffer between properties that are zoned village center or C1 and the residentially zoned property. So at a minimum, they would have to be 15 feet away from any residential property. As for obstructing traffic views, the clear sight triangle will apply whether there's 12 units, 8 units, whether this property is vacant. There can still be weeds that are growing up that impact the clear sight triangle. That must be kept clear no matter what is on the property.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I will just finish by saying it's too bad we have this requirement. I don't like it, but it's there, and I hate the idea of setting a precedent in regards to hardship. We ought to be glad somebody wants to do anything with that piece of property, to tell you the truth. Even if it was just 2 units, we ought to clap for them, but here we are. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
I do have a quick question for Director Justice. The property directly to the east of this lot is zone special use, I believe. And then we have R3 zone continuing eastward from that. And I see that the applicant did include that required 15-foot landscape buffer between his property and the special use. But can you speak a little bit to the setback requirement on the east property line? Just so I could be clear with what that means with special use.
Yes, so Chair Seavey, commissioners, the property to the east is actually zoned village center as well with a special use permit overlaid on top of it. So even though we have a 15-foot residential buffer, it's only for residentially zoned properties. So though they are providing that buffer on the east side, they're not required to, but they're more than welcome to. And I guess I will also just mention that because this could be precedent setting and there seems to be some opinion from the commission that, it would be nice to be able to allow this, not necessarily for this application, but in the future, if we want to be able to, we can revise our variance language. And with any decision that the Planning and Zoning Commission makes, any party can appeal that decision to the Board of Trustees. They're more of a policy-making body. We have done something similar for another application that, if approved, could have set a precedent. So the commission denied it. They appealed that decision to the Board of Trustees. The trustees kind of have a bit more flexibility in that they are a policy-making body. And, if it is determined that, we do want lower density residential, not just for this property, but perhaps in general, that's a call that they can make.
Thank you, Director Justice. I think personally, I'd be inclined to deny the variance request at risk of creating policy. And that's not really our job. And also seeing that, hardship was not met, that just adds to the argument to deny it. and also standing up for the density that's inside of the village center zone. I think, you look at the zoning map of Los Ranchos, the village center is just this tiny little bit, and there's not a ton of lots zoned that way. So I really think sticking with the prescribed density is advisable, at least in my opinion. So do we have a motion?
Chair Seavey, are we ready to make motion? Are you done?
No, if you have further comments, please go ahead, Commissioner Gay.
No, I don't have any further comment, but I am ready to make a motion.
Please do so.
I make a motion, we defer this application until the next regularly scheduled meeting.
Commissioners, do we have a second? I believe the motion dies for lack of second.
Was it the 30-second rule?
Well, with that, I move to deny variance 21-05.
Diane, I second it.
Commissioner Seavey has moved to deny variance 21-05, and Commissioner Albert has seconded. We'll move on to a roll call vote. Commissioner Christensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Benavides,
Yes.
Commissioner Gay,
Nay.
Commissioner Seavey, yes. Commissioner Michelson,
Yes.
and Commissioner Albert.
Yes.
Okay, the motion carries 5-1. Let the record show that the public hearing item 4B, the request by Nemagen Plaza LLC for a variance, is formally closed. We'll now move on to item 4C, which is Site Development Plan 21-02, a request by Nemagen Plaza LLC for a sketch plat review for a commercial site development plan for a development in the VC zone in the 4th Street corridor and character area. The property is located at 6502 4th Street Northwest and is legally known as Lot A, Blanche P. Doken subdivision of Lot 2 Merritt Acres, excluding the easterly 165.84 feet, School District 4, Bernalillo County, New Mexico, as filed in the office of the Bernalillo County Clerk on September 30th, 1937. The property contains 0.5016 acres, more or less. And there is no action by the commission on this sketch plat review. This is an opportunity to give general information and guidance for the proposal. The commission should advise the applicant in the following manner. If the proposal has merit, if the configuration would be acceptable, if the commission sees difficulty in the site development conforming to the master plan and the zone code requirements. And since we haven't had anyone recuse themselves yet, we'll keep moving. Director Justice, could we have the planning report, please?
Yes, commissioners, this application is for a site development plan for the property that we've been discussing. It's a new development that's on a vacant lot. This was formerly the location of a gas station. And as Chair Seavey mentioned, there's no real action taken on this application. And really, this is only discussion and guidance from the commission. And so I'll just be brief with this. We will go into much more detail on the preliminary site development plan, which would be the next step. Because there's no action taken, regardless of the conversation tonight, the applicant can move forward with applying for a preliminary site development plan, which would be in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission the next time that they applied. And so my analysis goes over some compliance with the village center zone and some non-compliance, and in general compliance with the site development plan requirements. Obviously, this is a concept review, so the compliance with the site development plan requirements is relatively brief. This would be much more fleshed out in the preliminary site development plan application. And so as for the configuration, there is some general comments that I have on just the ingress and egress. It seems to be acceptable. Just in general, we require that the property still has to be accessible by waste management. So as long as they work with waste management to ensure that they will be able to get any residential rollout bins or dumpsters, then that would work. As for compliance with the zone code requirements, there's a couple sections where the current proposed design appears to not comply with our design requirements. One of those is actually the setbacks. I know that the commissioners were discussing this a little bit earlier, but the village center zone actually has minimum and maximum setbacks for buildings. And this is not divided by commercial or residential. So this is something that, you know, perhaps this is not taking into consideration the fact that this is a residential use of this building, and the buildings, you know, whoever is in there may want to be further set back from the road. But right now, with the current configuration of the buildings, which is 8 dwelling units, which would have to change to 12, the current setbacks are not met because they are actually exceeded, which is kind of odd, considering that most of the time, you know, the requirement is for a minimum, but the village center zone does have a minimum and maximum. And so just, I guess our discussion on this application is a little bit limited just because the current design does show for 8 townhomes and that variance application was denied. So they would have to go back and present in their preliminary site development plan a proposal for 12 dwelling units, which may comply with the setback requirements. The other one is that we do require that buildings are 50% along the property line of 4th Street, actually. So we actually want buildings to be right up onto the sidewalk, right next to the street. And that actually is something that's required for buildings in the village center zone. But again, with their current design, they may have to go back to the drawing board with some changes. But for both of these, would the commission approve of some flexibility with these design guidelines? And with that, I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Director Justice. Do we have any questions from the commission at this point? I do have a question, Director Justice. So along 4th Street and Willow, are we considering that the front setback, and are we considering the north and east property lines to be side or rear? Could you just clear that up real fast?
Yes, Chair CV, commissioners, typically with lots with double frontage, both lots that are fronted are actually considered the front. And it is kind of up to whoever the property owner is to decide which one of the opposite would be the rear or the side. And so that's the typical way that we consider it, because usually it's based on where a lot is able to get its legal access. However, if the legal access is limited to one side, then that would be considered the front. So in this case, the front is considered 4th Street and the rear is considered the east side, with Willow and the northern property line being considered the sides.
Thank you, Director Justice. Okay, is the applicant present?
Stand by.
All right, Mr. Pacheco, would you like to speak again about your application?
I mean, I think I agree with Director Justice at this point. The sketch plat's kind of moot because we're going to have to go back and redesign and you know, to meet the requirements of 12 units. I have no further comment. I mean, I'm going to have to sit down with my architect and do a site plan and figure out how we're going to fit 12 units on there and meet the other requirements. I mean, I do find it ironic as a developer that I'm trying to move in the other direction, but you know, rules are rules, and I do understand them. So we'll move forward in cooperation with Planning and Zoning Commission.
All right, thank you, Mr. Pacheco. Do we have any other questions or comments from the commission? I will say, with the revelation about the landscape, you know, at first when I looked at it, I thought it was going to be a 15-foot required setback on your east property line there, but it looks like there might be a little bit more flexibility than from when I first looked at this thing. And I'm also wondering about this retention pond you have in the southwest corner of your site. You know, there could be other ways to buy more space on this site to look into. So it is kind of a tight condition, though. I'll give you that. Commissioner Michelson.
Yeah, I think of thinking about the people that will be living there. I think the setback on 4th is very important, both in terms of noise, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the other things need to be taken into account, but now that he's gone to 12 units, it just makes it more complex. I understand the reason that we need to keep it that way, but thinking about the setback is an important, whether they have access on 4th or on Willow is two different things, but I think that's important to take into consideration. Thank you.
We have any additional comments? Well, with that, I think I'll formally close item 4C. Thank you, Mr. Pacheco, and we wish you good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to item 4D, variance 21-06. It's a request by John Tittman and Carmen Martinez Tittman for a variance from 9.2.7 E1. The minimum lot area shall be 1 acre. That's 43,560 square feet, to allow for a minor subdivision of a 0.46 acre lot into 2 lots of approximately 0.16 and 0.30 acres in the A1 zone in the Guadalupe Trail character area. The property is located at 7601 Guadalupe Trail Northwest and is legally known as Lot B, lands of Remedios C. Gomez, and tract 85B as shown on map number 27 of the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District, MRGCD map number 27, projected section 20, township 11 north, range 3 east, NMPM, as filed in the office of the Bernalillo County Clerk on July 9th, 1959. The property contains 0.46 acres more or less. Do we have any commissioners who will recuse themselves from this item? Seeing none. Director Justice, could we have the planning report?
Yes, commissioners. So this applicant desires to subdivide this half-acre property into 2 quarter-acre lots, more or less. The property has 2 separate houses with separate utilities. This is currently existing. This is not proposed. And the lot division would put each house on a separate lot. And so, similar to the last variance application, I'll be going over the variance criteria that we have. The first one is section 9.2.25 E7A1 about the variance being in conformance with the goals and policies of the master plan. As with the last application, this application is and is not in conformance with the goals and policies of the master plan, because by their nature, variances are contrary to the master plan when it comes to complying with our zoning requirements. However, this variance is supported by the master plan in the village form and residential development sections. And in accordance with section 9.2.25 E7A2, this variance is not contrary to the public interest. This proposed subdivision of the lot is consistent with the lot sizes along that private road and could bring the property closer into compliance with the single dwelling unit requirement of residential zones. This could also allow for increased land ownership since one house is a rental in the present condition. And with both houses on one lot, one house must be a rental because the home is on the same lot as another home, and only one of those homes could be owned by a landowner. The village received no comments in favor or in opposition prior to publishing of the meeting packet. And in accordance with section 9.2.25 E7A3, the variance meets hardship criteria number 5. The applicant does cite criteria number 1 and 2. However, they don't apply, as the physical characteristics of the land, the condition of the land, were not affected by provisions of government, by the adoption of provisions, government action, or natural forces. However, this applicant does meet criteria number 5, where other relevant factors exist that, when taken into account, indicate the granting of the variance is substantially justifiable, given proper weight to the interests of the property owner, the public interest in protecting and fostering the character of the vicinity and the village, and the intended purpose of the master plan and zone code. I already mentioned the compliance with the master plan, and also how this can be support the public interest in having increased land ownership, and is comparable to the lot sizes of other properties that are along that private road. And in addition to that, there's just some other information that the original subdivision occurred prior to annexation into Los Ranchos. And so the properties to the west and south were subdivided into smaller lots when they were in Los Ranchos without the replat process, because at the time that was not really a requirement in the village code. And then, as shown in this application, the proposed lot line division would be similar to the lots to the south, and the size of the lots would be comparable to the rest of the lots along that road. And so, as mentioned before, this application is justifiable in the public interest and per the master plan. And this application is also in conformance with section 9.2.25 7C 1 through 6, that this doesn't affect the zoning of the property. Financial gain or loss is not a deciding factor. The variance differs only enough to relieve the alleged hardship of having 2 houses on one property, and the extenuating circumstances that the houses are currently it is in conformance with the character of that road, and that this can also provide closer compliance to other sections of the village code with single-family residences on one lot instead of 2 single-family residences on one lot. And the hardship is not self-imposed by the property owner. No prior application for the variance has been submitted in the prior 6 months, and the variance is unique to the circumstances of the property. So with that, the department recommends approval of V21-06 for a variance from section 9.2.7 E1. The minimum lot area shall be 1 acre, 43,560 square feet, to allow for a minor subdivision of a 0.46 acre lot into 2 lots of approximately 0.16 and 0.3 acres in the A1 zone in the Guadalupe Trail character area, with the following conditions and findings. The condition that the lot shall be subdivided with one of the existing houses on each property, i.e. this condition would prevent the subdivision of this lot where the two houses still remain on one property. And with the findings that the variance does meet the requirements of section 9.2.25 E7A, B, and C, and public notice requirements have been met. I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Director Justice. Do we have any questions from the commission for the planning director? I do have one that came up when I was reading about this, this garage that sits between the 2 houses. I'm kind of curious what your take is on it. Director Justice said, it kind of depends on where the lot line would lie, but the applicant actually indicated that it's not compliant. So I'm just kind of curious what your take is on this garage that's central to those 2 houses.
Yes, Chair Seavey, commissioners, there is a garage that is between the 2 houses that is also relatively old. It is a single car garage. The position of the garage currently means that if they were to divide the property so that each house is on separate properties, that garage would either have to be on one property or demolished. And if the garage is going to be kept, it would be located within the setback between those 2 properties. So if the applicant does desire to keep the garage, they would have to later apply for a variance for having the building in the setback. But that is something that is separate from this variance application that they would just have to go through with. And as mentioned earlier on the other variance application, yes, they would have to wait 6 months after approval or denial of this application in order to apply for the variance for the garage. The alternative to the variance is that they could demolish the garage. The reason for that is basically we require a 15-foot side setback between buildings and the property line, and that garage, whether it's on one property or another, would be in the middle of that somewhere. But if it's removed, both houses are compliant with that 15-foot side setback.
Thanks for the clarification, Director Justice. And yeah, that makes sense to me. Thank you. If we don't have further questions, is the applicant present?
Stand by.
Good evening. If you can hear us, would you please state your name and address for the record?
Yeah, my name is John Tittman. My address is 5567 Corrales Road in Corrales.
Thank you. Attorney Winter, would you please swear in Mr. Tittman?
Mr. Tittman, please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Would you like to speak about your application, Mr. Tittman?
Well, it's not like anything like the last three we've heard for quite a while this evening. I think it's pretty straightforward. We would like to divide the land so that it sort of equals the rest of the land in the neighborhood and makes the two houses available to sell, one perhaps, or both, to people who would own their residence. And I can answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the commission for the applicant? Yes, Commissioner Michelson, please go ahead.
What is the plan for the garage?
I think we're going to demolish it. It's not much of a garage. It's got a dirt floor. It had a fire some years ago. I think if we get the variance, we'll just demolish the garage and put the property line probably right in the middle of where it was.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions from the commission? All right, hearing none. Do we have anyone present who would like to speak in favor of the application?
There are no hands raised.
All right, thank you. And is there anyone present who would like to speak in opposition to the application?
Yes, stand by.
Good evening. Would you please state your name and address for the record?
Camille Varos, 427 El Paraíso, Los Ranchos.
Thank you, Ms. Varos. Seeing that you've been sworn in at this meeting already, please go ahead with your comment.
Okay, I don't know that I'm speaking for or against because things are changing. But just to state, and this has been in, I'm going to go back in history, and just before the pandemic came and before Director Justice was in her position, there had been many denials for applicants who wanted to subdivide their property, and the owners were actually on the property, but they wanted to build another, more or less like Mother's Day quarters, but that's all, those have always been denied because of the venue of what Los Ranchos has represented. Because once you set a precedent or once you approve, even though looking at the neighborhood the way it is in that area of where the applicant is applying for a variance, that might have been, the case, grandfathered in or over time. But when you really look at the village overall, looking at the property on Rio Grande and looking at my own neighborhood, we're on half-acre lots. And once you start approving of an application that goes against the variance overall, then that leaves that open for other people to do the same. And then there we go. Where do we really want the direction of the village to go? Is it just, and the applicant, he's not even in the village, he's in Corrales. And, people say, well, we're going to sell, but many times they will rent. And I think it's important to really look at the applications, the proprietors, the owners, and the true, where they want to go with this. And and I just know that to be true, just like on our property, in our, neighborhood, you allow for one, whether it's a business permit out of a home, then it leaves it open for the neighborhood residents to do likewise, because one was approved. And, so I'm really looking at the future of our village and where we have been and where we are going. And so it just seems like whether or not the residents oppose or ask questions about where we want to go with, approvals and how that's going to affect the overall village, stands to be seen. And thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Varos. Kiko, do we have anyone else present who would like to speak in opposition to the application?
There are no further hands raised.
Thank you. And would the applicant like to respond to any of the comments we just heard?
Sure. I would agree with the woman's concept of the entirety of Los Ranchos. And I think there's a great deal to be protected in Los Ranchos. I think this present situation on this private road does nothing more than equal a previous subdivision of lands of Remedios Gomez Tract A, which is across the street. The line we're talking about doing is exactly where the line of that property was divided some years ago. So there's no change. Really, both houses are there. They've been there for 20 years that I've owned the property. And I think it would be better overall for the village of Corrales if people, Los Ranchos, I'm sorry, if people were able to buy those houses. I have 2 tenants in there now who have already expressed interest in trying to buy the houses. If in fact I get a variance and if in fact I decide to sell. So to me, it's it is what it is, and I think it's a good deal for the village.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tittman. Do we have any further comments from the commission? Commissioner Benavides, please.
So in the director's report, it states that the original subdivision occurred in 1959. So I'm curious if that subdivision also included a subdivision of the 0.46 acres that Mr. Tittleman is talking about, or was it just the surrounding area?
So Commissioner Benavides, commissioners, this So the original subdivision was for, at least for this property, the way that it currently is. It hasn't changed since 1959 in terms of subdivision. The original subdivision in 1959 was for 4 lots on that private street. And then the current way that the properties have been subdivided has happened since that time. So the original subdivision was for a 0.46 acre lot here, across the street to the north and further back along that private road as well.
Okay, and were the houses built before before 1959 or before we became a village?
Mr. Titman, would you know how old these residences are?
I really don't. They've been there for the last 20 plus years. I think it's been about 22 years that I've owned the property. They have been there and lived in that entire time.
And Commissioner Benavides, commissioners, just I guess for some edification, based on satellite images and everything, these buildings have been there for since at least the 90s. Unfortunately, satellite images don't go further back than that, but we don't have any building permits for those properties for new residences, and like for going back at least within the past like 30 years. So they are relatively old buildings.
Yeah, it'd be important to know if they were there prior to the village becoming a village. Now, did you say there are 2 separate addresses?
Yes.
Is it like A and B or something like that, or?
Well, you know, it's a private road and it's been changed around quite a bit since I've been there. My property used to be 7605A and 7605. And some years ago, somebody on the road wanted 7605, so I became 7601 and 7601A. I don't know why, but it just happened.
Okay, I imagine you've suffered through a lot of lost mail during that time.
You know, you expect it. It was all right.
Okay. All right, I guess you answered the question to the best of your ability. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any further discussion with the applicant before Commissioner Michelson?
No, I'll wait till there's discussion with commissioners. Thank you.
Sounds good. Hearing no other comments, I'll go ahead and close the floor for discussion. And do we have any discussion on the application prior to a motion? Yes, Commissioner Michelson.
Yes, I drove down there and looked at the neighborhood, and what Mr. Titman is requesting would be very much consistent with what the neighborhood is subdivided now, so that there would be no standout. It would be very consistent. He has agreed to remove the garage, which would be very important. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the commission?
Yeah, Chair Seavey, I agree with Ms. Barros. I live on Guadalupe Trail a little bit north of there, and I live on a private driveway. It's not even really called a street because it's private property. I had similar when I bought these 2 properties. I had to subdivide them to make them larger so I could build a home, and it worked out great for me. But I also, you know, I live down here. I think it does change the character. I'm not against. I understand that these old properties have a lot of, you know, unusual characteristics, but I think we are going backwards if we approve this. And I think that, yeah, technically, you know, JT is right. You wouldn't even know the difference if they subdivide them. But right now we have two rentals, And now if this passes, there'll be 2 homes and the 2 homes could be sold. I think that starts to change the narrative about financial gain on this property. Not saying that they would do it, but I'm not sure what other reason for converting them from rentals to homes would be, since they don't live on the property now. So I appreciate Ms. Butler's comments, and being a longtime village resident who has lived on this exact same kind of property and had to deal with everything that goes along with that. I don't believe that I could. I couldn't vote for this, not because I wanted to hurt these applicants, is because I think if we do this, we keep going further and further back. And we have a number of substandard lots on Guadalupe Trail already. I don't mean substandard as that they're just a little bit small. They are almost unlivable, and I'm not sure what a lot of these people are going to do with these things unless they do what I did, which is to buy a couple of them and make them larger. So that's all I got.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other comments?
Yeah. So I don't live too far from that area, and I agree the housing density seems to be much higher in that area, although I haven't walked down those private roads. Given that those homes are already there, and I don't think it's going to change the character, right? I mean, they're already there, they're occupied, and whether somebody rents or buys, it doesn't. I don't know if that really changes the character. But this is, and so I was trying to find a reason to approve of this, which is why I was asking the questions about, hey, had this been subdivided before, and or maybe those homes were there prior to the village becoming a village. You know, those are reasons I think we've used in the past for allowing this sort of thing. And so my hang up right now is about setting precedent, and we just went through this with the previous applicant with the hardship criteria, right? Well, he doesn't have a very good hardship criteria. So don't we have a similar problem again in setting precedent if we don't have a good reason to allow this to happen? Even though I don't really care that much, it's just the issue of precedent.
And Commissioner Benavides, Commissioners, I know that wasn't necessarily directed to me, but I would like to provide
please.
a little bit of comment on that. And also a little bit pertaining to Ms. Farros's comment about prior applications for folks who wanted to subdivide their property. The big difference between that and this is that these houses are existing versus doing a proposed residence. So these are existing the way that they currently are. And so that, I guess, this isn't necessarily precedent setting for people who want to subdivide their property to build another house, because these houses already exist. That is the factor that is kind of the criteria that is in order to meet number 5, that there's just other relevant factors that indicate that granting a variance is substantially justifiable. So these houses already exist. And whether or not the property owner intends to rent or sell them is not necessarily our purview or the village code. We don't have any restrictions on whether somebody can rent or sell a property. But basically the idea here is that this is already existing. And so this already is, I guess, grandfathered in and non-conforming because there's 2 separate houses with 2 separate utilities on the same lot. That's, I guess, the big difference between a new subdivision for a new house and the way that this property currently exists. And so the other relevant factors that kind of factor into this are the fact that These houses have existed there for quite some time, at the very least. And this condition will exist whether the properties are subdivided or not. And so this actually kind of brings it closer into compliance, even though the lot sizes themselves are smaller. This does still, it's a single family residential still. Right now, this is 2 residences on 1 property.
Thank you, Director Justice.
Commissioner Benavides, you're muted.
Thank you. It's likely those houses have existed prior to 1964. I'm just looking at them. They're likely to be much older. It would have been very helpful and a very strong argument if he could have stated that. And he probably can. You can probably find that out. You know. So I think what I'm hearing from you, the Director Justice, is that it's legally non-conforming. But we wouldn't know that unless we knew when it was built, right?
Commissioner Benavides, commissioners, after a certain point, sometimes the documents on these things just don't exist anymore. And so unfortunately, when some things just get old enough, we have to trust that they've been there for long enough. We know at the very least that these buildings have been on that property since the 90s. We may be able to get records prior to that, but they have existed for quite some time.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And, I will add under section C, general principles applicable to all variances, item 6. And I just wanted to state this in response to some of the public comment we received on this out of fear of setting a precedent. I'll read section 6 right now. Each and every variance is unique to the circumstances of the property for which it was granted. The granting of one variance does not set precedents for later variances. So we do have that in writing to lean back on when that day comes. Do we have any further discussion prior to a motion? All right, well, do we have a motion? Commissioner Michelson.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve the minimum lot area to allow for a minor subdivision of 0.46 acre lots into 2 lots of approximately 0.16 and 0.30 acres in the A1 zone in the Guadalupe Trail character area.
Commissioner Christensen, I see you raising your hand.
Add with the planning report, the conditions that Tiffany has regarding the condition that the lot shall not be subdivided with one of the existing houses on each property. Don't we want to add that condition, right, Tiffany, to the motion?
That is my recommendation. Commissioner Michelson, if you would like to amend your
I
motion.
would add that Commissioner Christensen is added to my motion.
Do we have a second? I will go ahead and second. Oh, sorry. Okay, I'll go ahead and second the motion. And we'll now move on to a roll call vote. Oh, excuse me, let me read this out loud. Commissioner Michelson has moved to approve variance 21-06 with the conditions listed in the planning report, and Commissioner Seavey has seconded the motion. We will now move on to a roll call vote. Commissioner Christensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Benavides,
Yes.
okay, Commissioner Gay. You're on mute.
Sorry, nay.
Okay, Commissioner Seavey, yes. Commissioner Michelson
Yes.
and Commissioner Albert.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passes 5-1. Let the record show that the public hearing item 4D, the request by John Titman and Carmen Martinez Titman for a variance is formally closed. We will now move on to item 4E, variance 21-07. A request by Jan Sultan and Liesel Orend for a variance from 9.2.7 C5C and D. Occupants shall not be charged rent unless an explicit conditional use allowing rental has been approved by the commission, or rent is for only short-term rental as all part of a permitted bed and breakfast establishment. And guest houses shall not have a separate address, to allow for rental of a guest home with a separate address in the R2 zone in the 4th Street character area. The property is located at 501 Mullen Road Northwest and is legally known as Lot 24 of El Paraiso, Unit 1, projected Section 29, Township 11 North, Range 3 East, NMPM, School District Number 4, Bernalillo County, New Mexico, is filed in the office of the Bernalillo County Clerk on February 12, 1941. The property contains 0.455 acres, more or less. Do we have any commissioners who will recuse themselves from this item? Okay, hearing none. Director Justice, could we please have the planning report?
Yes, commissioners. So the applicant desires to rent a conditionally approved guest house for long-term rental. The guest house has a variance to allow encroachment in the setback, so that is not relevant to this application. This application is for rental of the guest house, which would include having a separate mailbox. As with the other variance applications, there's a few sections of our variance section of our code that I'll be going over. The first is regarding section 9.2.25 E7A1. The variance is and is not in conformance with the goals and policies of the master plan. As mentioned all before, by the nature of the request, all variances do not conform with the master plan simply for the provisions in the master plan that say to comply with the code. The residential section of the master plan does identify considering allowing long-term rental of guest houses, provided the property owner lives on site, as an alternative form of residential development after feasibility and fit is determined. However, this is guidance for potential policymaking, potentially through a pilot project, which would be done by the Board of Trustees. So even though there is some language in the master plan that considers long-term rental of guest houses, that is more of a policymaking decision that is potentially considered through a pilot project through the Board of Trustees. So I do not believe that that could be considered for compliance with the master plan requirement. Regarding section 9.2.25 E7A2, the variance is contrary to the public interest. The condition prohibiting long-term rental is meant to ensure that the single-family nature of the village's residential zones is maintained. Since though there are two dwellings on a property, a main house and a guest house, they belong to the same household. The idea is that without, by not charging rent and not having a separate mailbox, it's meant for in-laws, guests. You know, you wouldn't charge your mother-in-law, or maybe you would want to, but ideally you wouldn't. The conditional use does not preclude a renter of the main house who could not have a member of their household live in the guest house. So this is consistent with the current manner that the guest house is occupied by the renter's family, as mentioned in the applicant's letter. And in the case of no renter of the main house, the guest house would similarly be vacant. So right now, even if the property owner is not on the property, they can rent out the main house, and by extension, a member of that family who is renting that main house can reside in the guest house, but they would not be a separate rental. The village received no comments in favor or in opposition prior to publishing of the meeting packet. However, after we have the applicant speak and those in favor and in opposition speak, I will be reading out loud comments that I received after publishing of the meeting packet, just for the sake of the record. And then regarding section 9.2.25 E7A3, the variance does not meet any hardship criteria, as the applicant didn't identify hardship criteria to justify a variance. The application is in conformance with section 9.2.257 C2 and 5, that the financial gain or loss is not necessarily a deciding factor, and no prior application for a variance has been submitted on this property in the prior 6 months. However, the application is not in conformance with section 9.2.257 C1, 3, 4, and 6, as this does affect the zoning of the property by allowing two long-term residences on one lot that is intended for one residence. There's no hardship criteria necessarily identified. And as for the other application where there was no hardship criteria identified, approval of long-term rental of guest houses without justification of a hardship criteria could set precedents. I know that we do have language in the code saying that each application is unique to the circumstances of the property. However, those two sections of our code can coexist and can be taken into consideration together. And so with that, the department recommends denial of V21-07 for a variance from section 9.2.7C, 5C, and D. Occupants shall not be charged rent unless an explicit conditional use allowing rental has been approved by the commission, or rent is for short-term rental as all are part of a permanent bed and breakfast establishment. And guest houses should not have a separate address. To allow for rental of a guest house with a separate address in the R2 zone in the 4th Street character area with the following findings: that the variance partially meets the requirements of our variance section, but also does not, as mentioned before. Just to reiterate, this does not exclude the opportunity for a renter or the property owner to have a bed and breakfast establishment that would allow short-term rental of the guest house. This is for long-term rental only. Bed and breakfast permit would have to be applied for separately from this. And public notice requirements have been met. And as with that other application where I recommended denial, I have included in the circumstance that the commission would like to approve a condition if it is approved. However, again, I am recommending denial. And that condition is that allowance of the guest house long-term rental provided by this variance expires after 2 years from date of approval. Continuation of guest house long-term rental must be reapproved by the Planning and Zoning Commission. So again, I recommend denial because the hardship criteria is not met. However, if approved, I do recommend a time limitation for the variance, as the applicant's reason for long-term rental in the guest house, as indicated in their letters, is tied to a temporary condition that they and their family cannot move to the Albuquerque area. As the circumstance is expected to change, the variance would not need to be tied in perpetuity to the property and future property owners. And again, I would just like to reiterate that fact that regardless of the variance, the applicant can currently rent out the main house for long-term rental. That is something that is not restricted in any way by our code. And somebody who is renting that main house, one of their family members can live in the guest house simultaneously, or the guest house can remain vacant. That is something that is allowed in general. And I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Director Justice. Do we have any questions from the commission for the planning director? Okay, hearing none. Is the applicant present?
Stand by.
Okay.
Hi, good evening. Would you please state your name and address for the record?
My name is Jan Sultan. My current residence is 208 Larson Street, Manhattan Beach, California.
Okay. And will you also be speaking this evening, Ms. Orend?
Yes.
Okay, would you please state your full name and address for the record?
Liesl Orend, 208 Larson Street, Manhattan Beach, California, 90266.
Thank you. Attorney Winter, would you please swear in Ms. Orend and Mr. Sultan?
Would you both please raise your right hand? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, would you like to speak about your application?
I'll keep it short. I know it's been a long meeting for you guys, and you've dealt with a lot of really important stuff. This is relatively small. We have a kid on the autism spectrum. We left New Mexico in order to go to California to get better resources for his education. When he graduated high school, we decided it was time to move back to New Mexico. He applied to UNM and got approved with a $30,000 rider grant. And we started looking for property. We found 501 Mullen. It was in a beautiful neighborhood, and it was probably the most rundown property in the whole neighborhood. And so we purchased it, and it was zoned R2. We figured this is perfect for us. There's this old shop building, and we can fix that up for the kid. Well, then in the midst of that, COVID hit. Now, both of us are medical arts practitioners. And so COVID just shut our businesses down. And it was really financially impossible for us to move. We had already started doing the remodel on the internal part of the big house, and it was a lot of deferred maintenance. But we got it done. And then we ran into the COVID situation, and we simply couldn't move. We couldn't put, UNM, he couldn't go to UNM except, as this COVID thing was, at its peak at that time. So he applied to University of California out here and got accepted to UCLA. He's autistic, but bright. And so we sort of got trapped in between. So we rented out the big house, and we decided to go ahead and proceed with remodeling the guest house against the time when we could move the whole family there. Now, we already own property in New Mexico, so it's not like we're Californians dropping in and hoping to make a profit here. That's not what we're doing. So so we build the guest house, and my kid's going to school at UCLA. We can't leave UCLA or can't leave California because he's got in-state tuition. So we got caught in between a whole bunch of variables that centered around the hardship of being hit by this COVID pandemic and having our livelihood compromised massively. So what we're asking for is a variance so that we could rent the guest house in this time when we cannot be in New Mexico. And we do currently have the current tenant's daughter living there, which is within the parameters. But I don't know how long that'll last. She's a 19-year-old woman, and she could move, and we'd be stuck with an empty guest house. So that's my argument in a nutshell. I'm open to questions.
Thank you,
Maybe I
Mr.
should speak
Silverman.
first.
Please go ahead, Ms. Oren.
Okay. So the story is just what Jen said. You had already approved of a variance for us to build the guest house in order for our son to live there. And so that was already in progress when COVID hit. The progress was slow, painful as a result of circumstances. But it was just finally completed within the last 2 months, I would say. Just finishing up. I wanted to, first of all, I guess I wanted to know, we received an outpouring of unhappy emails today from local residents. And I did try to respond to the first one, but there simply wasn't time for us to respond to the rest because they all came in today. But I wanted to read something that I wrote just to make sure that we're all on the same page about it. So a lot of the complaints seem to center around the weeds, and I want to explain the weeds. First and foremost, the weeds grew up into a literal wall around the guest house. But the reason for that is because we tried to plant. We planted some wisteria and some ash trees and set up drip irrigation. And apparently it was set up in a way that was over enthusiastic. And so literally in a month, we grew a weed wall. The weed wall is gone now. And we apologize for that if it is offensive to anyone. We do have property manager. His name is David Daneman, and he's confirmed that he's the property manager, and he's working on getting all of the things done that need to be done for the house, including removing some dead trees. I guess I wanted to say that I was hurt and stunned by the assumptions and the prejudices that I experienced reading the comments from the neighborhood. I know that you don't know me or know us or our family, but I also think that you don't know me or us or our family. And so some of the comments that I received, like we're just in it for the money, we're from out of state, and we don't care, all of these kinds of things are really untrue. And I was saddened to see that response without asking. So, and I was unclear also because I thought that we had sent out a letter that explained our situation and where we were coming from, but I don't understand whether people didn't receive that or how that all works. I wanted to tell you, though, that we have been systematically updating and improving this property. That's our goal. So we started with the inside of the main house. As Jan mentioned, it had a lot of things that need to be addressed just to get it up to the point where someone could live there. So we did that. And then we started on the back house, which is just about done. The trees and the landscape seem to be a strong priority for the neighborhood, and I have no problem putting that next. And that's where we come from anyway. We are strong gardeners, and that's kind of what we do. So that's why we planted those wisteria to begin with. The next steps would be, we know that the main house needs a roof and that the outside stucco and paint needs to be addressed. And then we know also that the gate and the fence need to be addressed. This is our project over the next several years, but this is where we're going. So our plan in purchasing this property was to bring it back up to the level of the neighborhood, which is, when we bought it, it wasn't there, but that's our hope. So that is our plan. We will be here for a minimum of 3 years more, just to be clear, because there will be 3 more years of college. And California is extremely tough about out-of-state tuition. So we will be here for 3 more years, regardless, in California. And I have questions also. I feel as though I'm just now understanding some of the factors in terms of the zoning. But I have questions in terms of the hardship criteria. I just don't understand how that works. But I guess that's it for now.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any questions from the commission for both applicants here this evening? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to Kiko. Do we have anybody who would like to speak in favor of the application?
Yes, stand by.
Good evening. If you can hear me, would you please state your full name and address for the record?
Chair Stevie, I apologize that there was nobody in favor that had raised their hand, but I do have people who are opposed.
Okay, well, that was my next question, Kiko. So we can move forward with that if they're to speak in opposition to the application.
Okay, I made another mistake. I apologize again. I do have somebody in favor. Give me 1 second.
Fair enough. So just for the record, they will be speaking in favor of the application. Good evening. Would you please state your full name and address for the record?
Are you speaking to someone in favor of the application? 'Cause-
Yes, ma'am. Would you please state your full name and address for the record if you are speaking in favor of the application?
No, I'm speaking against.
Okay,
So-
we'll hear the opposition next. Let me confer with Kiko. Kiko, do we have anybody signed up to speak in favor of the application?
I apologize for the confusion. Stand by 1 second.
Sure, thank you.
Commissioners, there's no one who's signed up to speak in favor of the application. Ms. Faros, just raise your hand when we were calling for people in favor of the application.
I see. Well, if we don't have anybody signed up to speak in favor, I suppose we could move on to those who would speak in opposition and allow Ms. Varos to make her comment.
Yes.
Okay,
Excuse me, would you please state
There's-
your full name and address for the record before continuing?
okay, did you have anyone else other than myself? Because I don't mind waiting if,
No, ma'am, no, please go ahead. Just be sure to state your full name and address for the record, please.
certainly. Camille Vados, 427 El Paraíso Road, Los Ranchos.
Thank you. You have
I
been
just-
sworn in. Excuse me, Ms. Varos, you have been sworn in, so I will allow you to continue on.
Okay, and I'm going to be speaking to the now owners of the property. This home is in my neighborhood, and they live, 1 block over from me. I know how this property was before the children sold the home to this present owner. And they asked specifically if they were going to be living in the home, and they said yes. And they worked very hard. This home was the home was kept, up. It was maybe outdated, but very clean. They worked hard to chop, get rid of trees that needed to go. There's 2 existing functional wells on the property that the grass, the trees could have been watered, but the owners have not been on the property since they purchased it. And even me, when I walk around, there has been multiple people at that residence and who have not taken care of the property. And they're renters. And the guest house, there was a variance for a guest house to go up, and I saw it. And okay, we were told, the neighborhood people, and that's how we know how things transpire in our neighborhood. We're neighborly. We asked if there was a son that was going to be living in the guest house, and they said no, because that son can't take care of himself. He has a disability. And we thought, okay. So I just had a guest house made on my property, a conversion of a garage, and my daughter lives there. And it, so we know we're doing this legally and to code and to ordinance, according to the Los Ranchos ordinance for a guest house. So I hope that the narrative that you heard from the owners that are absent, and that happens a lot, people buy property and they're absentee owners. And we're very particular about how our neighborhood is. In our covenants, it was never able for people to rent. Now things change, okay. But whoever's going to be here, we take pride in our neighborhood. There's children, even as a senior person, I have to trust that who's living next to me or in the same vicinity, that I'm going to be safe, that our children are going to be safe, and that there's not going to be, and that the people who want to live here are going to hopefully maintain the property. The property has been trashed for months because the home was purchased well before the pandemic. And okay, you know, situations do occur, life happens, but be honest. We want to know in our neighborhood what's going to happen in that home. You know, if they wanted initially to run it as a business, first we were told it was going to be a halfway house. That would be a concern for the safety. So, you know, if things change, if there's renters, fine. But we would still be concerned about the safety and of our neighborhood, who's going in and out of a home that we don't know. And 3 years is a long time away. So, and that's all I have to say. That home, the property was beautiful. Lots of greenery, flowers that could have been maintained. But when you have an absentee owner and renters that may not care, then that devalues the property. And that's a concern of our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Varos. Kiko, do we have anybody else lined up to speak in opposition to the application?
Yes, stand by. I'm having trouble letting somebody in. One more moment.
Sure, no problem.
Chris Martinez, if you are in, could you unmute? Okay, I'm gonna move on to another one. Stand by.
Good evening. Would you please state your full name and address for the record?
Hello, I'm Nancy Utzi, 520 Mullen Road Northwest, Los Ranchos, 87107.
Thank you. And Attorney Winter, would you please swear in Ms. Yusi?
Ms. Yusi, please raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you so much.
Please go ahead.
So, hi. So I live straight across the street. I did send a written statement with pictures of what the property looks like before the weeds were removed from the front and after. It's a sad looking property. And like Camille said, it was a beautiful property. Early this summer, I did speak to Mr. Sultan, and I told him that I was sure that Adolf was crying. He passed away a couple years ago or so. He always maintained that property beautifully, even though he was elderly. He hired it done. There was always, someone working in the yard, and so. The story goes, and it could be true. I don't want to say that that they are misleading us, but it is hard to believe that they planned on moving here. They stuccoed and roofed nothing like the original house, and the original house is just decaying. The roof never looked like that. It's in really bad shape. So just to say it hasn't been cared for, I would think that even though they live out of state, they could have arranged that the property was maintained, either by hiring it done with a maintenance company, or having the stipulation that the renters take care of it. This is the second group of renters, and they're quiet. It could be worse, and that's a scary thought, that it could be worse. So we definitely oppose the split of that property. It's not what they proposed and was what was originally approved. And considering how it's been neglected, we have to oppose. And that's it. I hope you do look at the pictures. It's not a good look.
Thank you,
But
Ms.
that's-
Yuti.
Thank you.
Kiko, do we have anyone else lined up to speak in opposition?
2 more, stand by.
Good evening. Would you please state your full name and address for the record, those who will be speaking?
Jason Aragon, 526 Mullen Road. Think I've been sworn in.
And Jennifer Aragon, 526 Mullen Road, Northwest.
Thank you. And Attorney Winter, we've already sworn in Mr. Aragon. Let's now swear in Ms. Aragon, please.
Ms. Aragon, could you please raise your right hand? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thanks. Please go ahead.
You wanna go?
So I'm gonna go on the oppose because they said they have a son that is autistic. I have one that autistic, doesn't like change. He's very attentive to things. And making this, as they say, a full-time rental, the little casita, it affects our kids. Again, I go back to when I first communicated that we have our kids that ride their bikes and have a good time. It's like the old school ways. But if it's a rental, full-time rental with their own driveway, their own mailbox, it can throw off not just him, but all of my kids, because they're very attentive. I'm a veteran, and so I've always taught my kids, pay attention to surroundings. And if something changes, they know what's going on. They may be young, but they're not oblivious to the real world. So I oppose the whole making it a full-time rental for the casita. I'm okay with you guys doing it as the main house as a rental and doing it as mother-in-law quarters. You don't charge rent. I'm good with that. That doesn't bother me none. I am totally against the whole idea with making it a rental separate from the main house, because I think there could be too many things going on.
Can I chime in on that?
Yes, you.
So like we were talking about on the variance before, it could set a precedent in the neighborhood. Like who's not to say people are gonna buy up another lot and get a variance to do a guest house, and then they wanna split the lot and then split the lot. And I think that takes away from the character of the neighborhood. We bought our house from my grandparents who lived here for 50 plus years. So I know this neighborhood well, and I have the original documents from this neighborhood. So I just don't want it to set a precedent, and that's why I'm against it. I know they're trying to say a hardship, and I understand that, but they still have a rental. So it's not like they're out. I mean, and if they do need the money, they can always sell. So that's my point on it.
We're good.
Okay, thank you for sharing your opinion. Kiko, do we have one more person, it sounds, to speak in opposition?
Yes, I'm gonna try to let in the phone number ending in 9042 one more time. Give me 1 second. Chair CV, that'll be it for now.
Okay.
Just commissioners, I did receive written comment, both from people in opposition and from the applicant. So because all of this correspondence was received after the meeting packet was published, I'm just going to read it out loud in chronological order. This is one of these letters is the letters that the applicant mentioned that they'd done in response. So if you'll just bear with me for this, I will just read these comments aloud. To Los Ranchos Village Planning and Zoning Commission, in response of item EB21-07, request for a variance to allow the rental and separate address for guest house at 501 Mullen Road Northwest, we, Alan and Nancy Utzi, opposed. Being that the owners live out of state, they obviously cannot oversee and have not provided or required the maintenance of the property. The second picture attached shows our view of the property on July 27. Weeds surround the house growing a foot above the roof line. Since then, probably because of this meeting, the weeds were removed from the front. Pick 2. 8-foot weeds, dead and dying trees around both houses still remain. Pick 1. This property is not being maintained, and therefore we ask the commission to deny the request for a variance. Thank you for your consideration. Ellen and Nancy Utzi, 520 Mullen Road Northwest. And attached to that correspondence was 2 photos showing the property before and after weeds were removed. After that was a response letter from Jenselton and Lisa Orand to Los Ranchos Village Planning and Zoning Commission. We wish to respond to the letter from Alan and Nancy Utzi dated August 8th, 2021 regarding 501 Mullen Road Northwest. We are not inclined to leave the property in an uncared for state, and we do have a paid property manager, David Daneman, who is overseeing the work there. The remodel of the studio has been a painfully long project, but we are proud of what we have built. Extra touches on that project, such as the porch, show that we are interested in making the property attractive. In the final phases of our project, we are addressing the landscape. Our first efforts did go a little astray because when we planted 4 wisteria plants to grow around the porch and 2 ash trees to provide shade, the irrigation allowed a forest of weeds to grow rather quickly. The areas we irrigated most likely had not been watered regularly in at least a decade or 2. However, these weeds have since been removed and the intended plants should thrive. We have been systematically improving and updating this property since we purchased it. The first step was the interior of the main house, which had a lot of issues just to bring it to a point where it was livable. The next step was the back house, which we have almost completed. We will be addressing the trees and the rest of the landscape, as well as the gate and fence. Our plan is to create, or rather recreate, a large garden in front of that small house. We will be replacing the roof of the main house and then addressing the outside stucco/paint. You can expect to see a gradual improvement over the next years, bringing the property back up to the level of those around it. You're not strangers to the area. Jan works in Santa Fe about every 6 weeks, and we own our own house in San Pedro. Our interest in buying the property was to create a place that is beautiful, that we can move into when we are able. Sincerely, Jan Sultan and Liesl Orend. The next letter to the Planning and Zoning Commission from the El Paraiso Neighborhood Association. The El Paraiso Neighborhood Association would like to object to the following variance unless there is clarification on if the owner plans on renting both houses, main house and casita, long-term, short-term, or short-term as a bed and breakfast. We'd like to know if the owners are going to live at the residence or if they are going to rent to an operator who will run the bed and breakfast for them. As a neighborhood association, we have no objections to a bed and breakfast, but we do object to 2 long-term rentals. The owner originally requested the remodeling of a shed into a casita for the use of their son when they moved to New Mexico, and they would live in the main house. That did not happen. They have rented it out and let the property become overrun with weeds. They only cleaned it up in the past week. If the main house bedrooms are to be used as guest rooms, it should be noted that some of the bedroom windows open into the garage. As of today, the owners have not lived in the house full time. They have neglected the property in the main house. We feel that this is just a way for the owners to rent out both houses. El Paraiso Neighborhood Association, Teresa Martinez, Chairman. Dear Zoning and Planning Commission, please allow me to express my opposition to the proposed changes in status to 501 Mullen Road Northwest. I have been a resident of Mullen for over 70 years and have gradually watched the street change from single-family residential dwellings to a road where almost 20% of the houses are owned by absentee landlords using them for commercial purposes. Although not currently listed for rent or sale, 501 Mullen Road is posted on a website called Zillow. The attached pages 6 and 7, together with page 5, are from this listing. Zillow's listing also claims the property is on half an acre. That is not correct. On the Rio Grande Conservancy plat, the property's measurements are 70 feet by 170 feet. This is nearer a quarter of an acre. The old vacant workshop, which was permitted to become a guest house for a quote-unquote start quotation, a handicapped son with the owner living in the main house, end quote, is now requesting to become another piece of commercial rent-producing income property. This request further erodes what is supposed to be a quiet single household residential subdivision, and I strongly oppose it. Best regards, C. Hugh Formhalls, 542 Mullen Road. And there were several attachments to this correspondence. A copy of the September 10th, 2019 minutes where B 19-06 was approved for placement of a guest house in setbacks for this property. Legal information from Bernalillo County parcel data and more legal information from Bernalillo County Assessor's Office and the Zillow listing. And the last, more correspondence to Village of Los Ranchos zoning and planning regarding 501 Mullen Northwest. This letter is to confirm that I am the property manager for the property above since August 2019. I've been asked to address the weed situation and I hired a gardener who began clearing the property but has since left the position. I'm in the process of hiring a new gardener to clear the remaining weeds as well as to provide ongoing yard maintenance. I'm also in contact with an arborist who will remove the dead trees. This should be completed in the next few weeks. Sincerely, David Daneman. And one more correspondence. Dear Village of Los Ranchos, my husband and I have lived here in Los Ranchos for 27 years. We love the country living and homes on half-acre lots, homes that are not all clustered together like city lots. The variance request from Jan Sultan and Liesl Orend will ruin that. Jay Sultan and L. Orend do not even reside in Los Ranchos. They reside in California. Sultan and Orend use 501 Mullen Road as a rental property. They do not care about our neighborhood and are interested in making a profit for their own pocket. The current renters in the main house do not maintain the yard, nor did the previous renters. This request will set a precedent for future owners. We strongly request you deny the request. Respectfully, John and Kathy Martinez, 514 Mullen Road Northwest, in parentheses, directly across the street from 501 Mullen Road Northwest. And that is all the written comment that I received after publishing of the meeting packet.
Thank you, Director Justice. So would the applicant like to respond to any of these comments?
Well, at this point, it's clear that nothing that I say is going to change the outcome. So I wonder if I should just save my breath. I will say, when I moved into that property, it was not a flower and garden fairyland. There were tumbleweeds. The garden was not maintained in front of the area where the shop, which is now the guest house, existed. The irrigation system, which was the well, was broken and did not work in the whole perimeter. It just wasn't, the roof was shot when we bought it. We knew we'd have to replace the roof in the main house, but we decided to try and get the interior squared away so that we could, move into it. And at that point, as I told you, we got COVIDed. But all this feedback about being disingenuous really breaks my heart. And I'm really sorry about that. Our intention was to make this a beautiful place. And yeah, we'll continue to do that. But that's all I got to say.
Thank you, Mr. Sultan. Ms. Oren, will you add anything?
I will ask a question, if I may, of Ms. Justice.
Please, I think that's okay.
Okay, so I want to understand, under the hardship criteria, when it says other relevant factors exist that when taken into account that the granting of the variance is substantially justifiable, giving proper weight to the interests of the property owner, the public interest in protecting the foster character of the vicinity and the village, and the intent and purpose of the master plan and code. I read that as a place where we would fit, and I see it as the factors as being that we have a substantial and bizarre hardship, which none of us could have predicted. But also that, like in previous properties, what we did here, we didn't build a new house. We took an existing building, an existing property, and made it better. And that's our intention and that's our goal. So I want to ask about that in terms of what constitutes hardship.
Yes, Ms. Orange, commissioners. So yes, that is one of the hardship criteria. Typically, when I look at whether or not an application meets the hardship criteria, I ask that the applicant identify which of the hardship criteria they believe apply to them. As you didn't identify any specific hardship in your application, I did not speak to that in my report. In general, for the other relevant factors that exist, you are correct that there is a circumstance of COVID at this point that could be considered a relevant factor. And in addition to that, one of the requirements is that this is in conformance with the intended purpose of the master plan and zone code. Obviously, a variance would not be in conformance with the zone code. That's besides the point. But for master plan, there does not appear to be a section of the master plan that would support long-term rental of guest houses explicitly for long-term rental. We do have a provision for more of a policy change to allow long-term rental given that the property owner lives on site. But that is more of a policy decision that needs to be made by the trustees. It is a bit unclear how the hardship of COVID-19 would necessitate rental of the guest house separate from rental of the main house. Because most guest houses, all guest houses that are permitted in Los Ranchos have that condition that they cannot be rented. So I guess the question is, why would there be substantial hardship specific to COVID-19 or other circumstances around the inability to rent just the guest house? And one of the things is that we do explicitly say that financial gain or loss cannot be a deciding factor. So it does need to be something other than financial.
I think the hardship would be that we can't move there. So we're not able to be living on site. And even that's in your pilot program, I believe that it would be rented for somebody, rented out, but someone would be still living on site.
Yes. And the thing is that that pilot project stuff that's mentioned in the master plan is not technically our code right now. That is suggestion for future policy making. So I guess whether you lived on the property or whether a renter lives on the property, that is less of a relevant circumstance to have the guest house be rented, because no matter what, you can rent out the main house, you can live in the main house, you and a renter could also live in the guest house. So I guess the question is, why would rental of the guest house, because you cannot move there, or even if you could move there, be necessary for this property?
At this instance, I think that the answer would be just in terms of the feasibility of renting. That would be the answer. But let's see. Okay. Thank you. The other things that I wanted to say are, I just wanted to address some strange rumors. Apparently, I could say unequivocally that there has never been any plan to operate a halfway house on the property. Not sure where that came from. And I believe that our situation is unique. I think that we got caught in a particular moment in time, and we're trying to move things in the right direction. And I hope that we can do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments from the commission while the floor is open and the applicants are present? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to go ahead and close the floor for comments. And before moving on to the commissioner's discussion, it is now 10:22 p.m. and procedurally we need to take a vote if we are to proceed with this meeting beyond 10 o'clock. So, you know, seeing that this is the last item and that we're almost through it, I will go ahead and make a motion that we continue and complete our meeting as scheduled.
Second.
Okay, Commissioner Seavey has moved to continue with the meeting, and Commissioner Benavides has seconded the motion. We will now move on to a roll call vote. Commissioner Christensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Benavides,
Yes.
Commissioner Gay,
Yes.
Commissioner Seavey, yes, Commissioner Michelson,
Yes.
and Commissioner Albert.
Yes.
Okay, the motion to continue with the meeting carries unanimously. So with that, we'll jump back into variance 21-07 and move on to a commissioner's discussion before a motion is made. So do we have any discussion? Hearing no discussion, it's a motion present. Do we have a motion?
I move to deny denial of B-21-07 for the variance from 9.2.7 C, 5C, and D. Occupant shall not be charged rent unless an explicit conditional use allowing rental has been approved by the commission, or rent is for or rent is for only short-term rental as well as all the part of the permitted board as a bed and breakfast establishment, and guest houses shall not have a separate address, to allow for rental of a guest house with separate address in the R2 zone in the 4th Street character area with the following findings. So I uphold the denial as written in the report.
Commissioner Albert, I second.
Okay, we have a second from, okay. Commissioner Christensen has moved to deny variance 21-07, and it has been seconded by Commissioner Albert. Now, before we move on to a roll call vote, do we have any discussion? I really think we need to have it in the record as to our reasoning here.
Yeah, sure. I'll offer some discussion. I believe the applicants are genuine in that they did not try to deceive the neighbors, and circumstances, they got caught up in different circumstances that are understandable. The weeds is an issue, but that is not the reason why I'm going to favor a denial. It's about following our code and our ordinance. So that's the only reason for me.
Thank you, Commissioner. And okay, well, with that, we're going to move on to a roll call vote. Commissioner Christensen,
Yes.
Commissioner Benavides,
Yes.
Commissioner Gay,
Yes.
Commissioner Seavey. Yes, excuse me. Commissioner Michelson,
Yes.
Commissioner Albert.
Yes.
The motion carries unanimously. Let the record show that the public hearing item 4E, the request by Jan Sultan and Liesl Orend for a variance, is formally closed. We'll now move on to item 6, old business. There is no old business. Item 7, new business. There is no new business. Item 8, report. Director Justice, may we please have the planning department report?
Yes, commissioners, this report covers the months of June, July, and August, since we haven't been able to meet to this point. And just a quick correction for COVID-19, you probably noticed we're back online. That was a relatively recent change. You know, we're following the guidance and the actions from other agencies and jurisdictions in our area, the guidance from public safety officer. You know, at this point, we did have to public notice and notify everybody that this meeting would be online. And we did that compliant with our requirements for agenda notice and everything. And we really tried to make sure to get as much of the immediately adjacent neighbors for all of these applications up to speed that this is going to be online. Hence probably why a lot of the comment that was received after the meeting packet was posted. So just as a heads up for that, we are anticipating to be online for the foreseeable future. In general, Jennifer Schilling, our planning and zoning coordinator and records information manager, is working with Kiko, our IT specialist, on a design new village website that should be up hopefully within the next month or so. She's continuing work on building permits, parcel permits in the magazine as usual, and reworking some of our applications to be clearer for applicants and streamlined for our records. Keen Heinzelman is training our department's new part-time code enforcement officer, Thomas Sanchez. Thomas started around the beginning of July. He's taking the job very quickly and diligently. He's regularly patrolling to familiarize himself with the village. And once duties are fully transferred over, Keen will return to public facilities management full-time. I presented a proposed cluster housing pilot project policy document before the board at their regular July meeting. I'm now working on drafting an ordinance based on their feedback. The ordinance regulating short-term rentals was approved by the Board of Trustees in June. There's going to be a grace period for existing unlicensed short-term rentals to obtain a bed and breakfast permit, which will go before the Planning and Zoning Commission for your all's decision. So please anticipate these applications on the agenda in the coming months. We do have a number of short-term rentals that are unpermitted that have the opportunity to be grandfathered in during our grace period. So we may have a busy agenda in the next coming months. And if necessary, we may want to consider holding like a meeting every 2 weeks just for some of these applications, depending on how many there are. So just something to keep in mind. And we do have some ordinance amendments before the board, some that were approved in July and some that are proposed for August and potential September adoption. I stand for any questions.
Go ahead, Commissioner Christensen.
For the last paragraph, there, it talks about the amendments for the ordinance changes, and it says 2 amendments are before the board in August for advertisement for potential September adoption. One is an amendment to the AC, the agricultural to commercial zone change approval process, to the typical zone change process identified in 9.2, which I remember you guys gave us a sheet during orientation. So that amendment is going that if I'm looking at this correctly, we would make a referral again to the board regarding zone changes from agricultural, residential to commercial. Is that correct?
Commissioner Christensen, commissioners, that is correct. The
Okay.
proposed amendment currently in the AC zone, there is a special approval process for zone changes to the AC zone that is outlined in that section. For any other zone change, whether it's commercial to residential, residential to commercial, commercial to commercial, or residential to residential, they all follow our normal zone change process, which does involve recommendation by the Planning and Zoning Commission of either approval or denial, final decision by the Board of Trustees, of which that decision can be appealed to district court. And so what the ordinance proposes is to have the AC zone change process follow the same zone change process that we have for all other zone changes. The packet will be posted on our website by the end of the day Friday, if anybody is interested in looking at the specific language.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I just needed clarification. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the commission? All right. Thank you for the report, Director Justice. We're going to move on to a commissioner's informal discussion, item 9. Are there any reports or information that any of the commissioners would like to share? Commissioner Benavides.
Let's see. I'm not muted, right? Okay, you can hear me, right? So I feel like I need to respond to Trustee Riccobini's comments during his informal discussion at the Board of Trustees meeting. I think it was in July. So basically, I don't know if you guys heard that, but he was very critical of the outcome of our May P&Z meeting in regards to the John Calvin application, and basically implied that what we did was improper and we did not follow our code. And I think Attorney Nan Winter clarified that we were proper in what we did. And so it was really disappointing for him to be so critical in a public setting of this commission. And I don't think there's any substance to his criticism. So I don't know where he's coming from. I'm sure I've made a lot of decisions, and you know, he's directed. He didn't pick me out, but I'm the one who made the motion. So yeah, I think it is directed towards me. But I think it's telling that I've made many decisions I'm sure he wouldn't agree with, but this particular one is one that he is very much aligned with and interested in, more so than any other application we've ever had, I think. So there's something telling about that. So I'll leave it at that. He's by the way, he's my neighbor. He's a good neighbor. He waves to me, but I think he was off base on this particular comment.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Christensen, please. Go ahead.
I just wanted to thank Nan for her presentation. It just showed that we were on point, and I appreciate you taking the time and sharing that with us, and that for people that were listening, because I've even had people say stuff to me about the meeting in May, which I think a lot of them were off base. So Nan, I really appreciate you giving us this information. I didn't feel during the meeting, and again, I recused myself. I didn't feel at any time in the meeting that a lot of the items that were brought to light by Mr. Riccobene were on point at all. So I just really appreciate you reinforcing what we do about deferrals. And I'm kind of chuckling in a way in that Mr. Riccobene sat on planning and zoning, and I'm sure he was involved at one time with deferrals. So yeah, I was really thrown by that, those comments by him.
Thank you, Commissioner. Do we have any other discussion? I think, it really is dealing with policy, and I think it might just be the architecture of our code that needs to be revised and looked at, and allowing these matters to go before the Board of Trustees if it is indeed, large policy decisions. So, which body these large decisions go before is something that we just need to review and grapple with. So, and with that, if we don't have any further comments, we're going to move on to item 10, adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, Commissioner Benavides has adjourned. Commissioner Christensen has seconded the motion. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The motion carries unanimously. And last page, here it is. The meeting for August 10th, 2021 is now adjourned at 10:36 p.m. Thank you very much.
Have a good night, y'all.
Good night. Good meeting.
Great meeting.